Victor pointed at me across the whole assembled party and called me a coward. He did it in the Great Hall, with nearly every member standing along the walls to watch, which is how I knew it wasn't an accusation. It was a verdict. You don't gather 10 people to a room to ask a question. You gather them to make sure nobody argues with the answer. I was the cook. That was the whole charge, underneath the fancier words. He said it plainly enough once the room was quiet. The cave dragon quest had failed, and the failure was mine. He said I'd used a fear spell without leave and driven the beast back into the dark, and then he added the part he actually wanted them to hear. That maybe I'd done it on purpose. That maybe a rival party had planted me here to rot their perfect record from the inside. A spy. He let the word sit in the air and watched it work. The cave dragon only surfaces once a year, from a floor so deep in the dungeon that most parties never see it. We'd chased it down there. That part was true, and it was the only true thing in his whole speech. I have a good memory for orders. It comes with the job. You learn to hold 20 things at a heat at once and never let a single one of them burn, or you learn to find another job. So I remembered very clearly that Victor himself had told me to use the dread voice. We had the dragon cornered on the lowest floor and the fight was already going wrong. The front line was overextended. Press it another minute and someone was going home in a box. And he knew it, and I knew it. And for once, we agreed. He gave the order to scare the thing off and save the party. I did. It worked. Everyone climbed back up into the light breathing, and not one of them thought to ask which of the cook's odd little skills had reached into a dragon's skull and turned it around. They never asked. That was the arrangement, unspoken and years old. I kept them alive, and they kept calling me the cook. It had suited me fine, right up until this afternoon. You gave me that order yourself, I told him, not loud. I didn't need it loud. The whole room had gone quiet enough to hear a knife set down. He denied it. Of course he denied it. He said I was shifting my own failure onto him, which is a neat trick when you think about it. Accuse a man of the exact thing you're doing to him, right to his face, and dare the room to notice. Nobody noticed out loud. That was the point of the room. So I stopped talking to Victor because there's no salt that fixes a dish that was ruined on purpose. I turned to the two people in that hall I'd have called friends. Fletcher was closest, a priest mage, timid on his best day, the kind of man who flinched at raised voices and then thanked you for the meal after. I'd healed his mana more nights than I could count, poured recovery into him when his own ran dry. I asked him, straight, whether he really believed I'd sabotaged the party. He looked at the floor. He mumbled something about following the captain's judgment. That was all. He gave me the top of his head and the captain his vote. And he did it because siding with me might cost him his place. And a place was worth more to Fletcher than the truth. Catherine at least made me wait for it. She was senior, steadier, and she'd eaten at my counter for years. I knew how she took her food, which is a kind of knowing. For a moment, she wavered. I saw it. Then she said she'd leave the matter to the captain and smoothed her voice out flat, and the wavering was gone. Fletcher folded because he was afraid. Catherine folded because she'd already done the math and I wasn't in the winning column. Two different men could tell you those are different sins. Standing where I was standing, they landed exactly the same. That was the moment it stopped stinging and went numb. Not the lie. I could have argued a lie. It was the silence around the lie. The whole room deciding at once that a cook wasn't worth the risk of being right. I looked down the walls at faces I'd fed for years. Men whose mana I'd topped off at 3 in the morning. Women who'd asked me for seconds and meant it. And every one of them found something fascinating to study on the floor. Nobody had to say a word. The floor said it for them. I gave Victor a dry little bow he didn't deserve. If everyone here had already decided the cook was the problem, then fine. I was done caring who agreed with what. He sneered that a cook was never fit for an elite battalion in the first place, that a class like mine had no business standing among real adventurers. I almost laughed, because here's the thing they never bothered to learn. The cook had been holding this party up with both hands for years. Every buff they marched into a dungeon wearing, every wound that closed too clean, every potion that was full when they reached for it. That was me, quietly, under a class name they thought was a joke. They'd been winning on my cooking and calling it their strength. And now they were throwing the strength out to protect the name. I didn't tell him that. Some truths you keep, because they're worth more later than they are loud now. I just told him I no longer cared, and I walked out of the hall while it was still silent, and I let the silence be their problem. My room was small, and I didn't own much, which made the leaving quick. A change of clothes. My knives, rolled in oilcloth, each one wrapped the way you'd wrap something you trusted. The meat cleaver last, heavy, honest, the one tool in the whole building that had never once lied to me. Everything I actually valued fit in a single bag, and I stood there a moment with that realization sitting cold in my chest. Years given to these people, and it all packed down to what one man could carry out the door. I laid the cleaver in on top of the rest, and I was folding the last shirt when the door banged open hard enough to rattle the frame. Katie stood in the doorway out of breath, one hand still on the door, red hair loose and her armor half buckled like she'd run from the other end of the building. The Crimson Swift Sword, they called her. Fastest blade in the battalion, freckles she hated, and the only person in that whole shining company who had ever looked at me and seen a person instead of a service. She kept one hand fisted on the doorframe like she needed it to stay upright. Tell me what happened. Tell me it isn't what they're saying. I told her it was exactly what they were saying, banished. There wasn't more to it than that. She came all the way in and started pacing, and the words came out of her fast and half tangled because she was already running the numbers I'd never said out loud. Who was going to handle the alchemy now? Who was mixing the potions? Who was cooking? She said the rear line couldn't tie its own boots without me, that they were high-born decoration picked for their faces, that the front line had been swinging so hard for so long because they never once had to worry about what happened behind them. They're going to fall apart, she said, and she wasn't guessing. You know they are. You did all of it. The support, the alchemy, the potions, the food, all of it was you. You're the reason we never lost. And there it was, said Plain, in a small warm room, by the one person who'd bothered to look. I did know. That was the strange, quiet center of the whole afternoon. An hour ago, a man in gold armor had stood in front of the strongest party in the world and called me a coward and a spy, a cook too small to stand among real adventurers. And here was the truth of it, laid on a plain bed next to a half-packed bag. Every clean win that party ever bragged about had my hands in it somewhere. The buffs they never saw me lay, the wounds that closed a little too neatly, the edge they'd been carrying into every dungeon and mistaking for their own strength. They hadn't fired a cook. They'd fired the engine and left the shine, and not one of them in that hall was awake enough to feel the floor tilt. Katie was. Katie had always been. She was the only one saying it, and she was completely right, and I let her say it. I owed the truth that much of a hearing, out loud, once, from the person who'd earned the saying of it. But I told her they'd manage. A frontline party learns fast when the ground drops out from under it, or it doesn't. And either way, it wouldn't be mine to catch anymore. She wasn't ready to lose the argument. She dropped the vice captain act and just asked, begged a little, for me to stay. Said she'd fix it herself, go over Victor's head, make it right. When that didn't move me, she tried the smallest version of it, the one that told me more than all the rest. Would I at least make dinner before I went? I remembered how she'd found me, years back. She'd tasted my cooking somewhere. A swordswoman of her rank had no business wandering, and instead of finishing the plate and forgetting it like a normal person, she'd gone digging, tracked the skills back to their source, turned up a nobody cook and recruited him into the strongest party in the world because she'd read the numbers hiding under the food. The legendary knife work, a stir-fry that had no right to do what it did to a person's strength. She'd known what I was worth from a single meal, and in all the years since, through every quest where the others called me the help, she'd never once let me forget it, even when forgetting me was the fashionable thing to do. The whole party used to gossip that we were together. We weren't. We mostly just talked about food until the candles burned down, and somewhere in the middle of that thought, I understood, finally and too late, why Victor had wanted me gone. It was never about a dragon at all. It was about the seat next to Katie and who got to sit in it. I didn't say that either. I picked up my bag. At the door, I stopped and took off the battalion coat, silver wings stitched across the back, the mark I'd worn into every dungeon we ever cleared. I looked at it for about as long as it deserved, which wasn't long, and I threw it on the bed behind me. Let it lie there. A coat is just a coat when the people wearing the rest of them decide you were never one of them. Then I walked out into the street, and the sun hit me full in the face. And I'll tell you something I didn't expect. It felt like a good day, not in spite of the banishment, almost because of it. Behind me, Katie called out one last order. Vice captain to subordinate, come back here. That's a command. I lifted a hand over my shoulder and gave her a wave without turning around. I'm a chef, I told her, not an adventurer. I think I always was. I'd saved enough over the years to start over somewhere small. There were countryside towns out past the dungeon roads where a lone cook could actually afford a building and a stove, where nobody knew the silver wing from a hole in the ground and cared even less. That was where I was going. Somewhere that would be mine. Here is the thing I'd known about myself for a long time and never once said aloud. A man who was fed once, as a starving kid in the rain, by a stranger who had no reason to bother, that man spends the rest of his life afraid the warmth was alone. that the moment he stops being useful, the plate gets taken back. I'd built a whole life on being useful, so nobody would ever have a reason to throw me out. And they'd thrown me out anyway, useful as I was, for a lie a coward told to save his pride. So I was finished earning my place at somebody else's table. They'd branded me a coward and a spy, and I could have carried that all the way down the road, turned it over, let it sour. I decided not to. Let them keep the name. Let them keep the perfect record too, and watch it crack. I was going to build something no one could throw me out of, because I'd be the one holding the door. A place to cook, a place to feed whoever walked in hungry and ask them nothing for it, the way somebody once fed me. A place that answered to me and to no captain in gold armor anywhere. And a rule I made myself right there on that sunny street, before I even knew who it would be for, that nobody who came to my table would ever be thrown away the way I'd just been. I didn't look back at the silver wings on the bed. I had a diner to go find. The town smelled like wet stone and somebody else's cooking, which meant nobody here knew how to salt a pot. That was the first thing I noticed, walking in off the road with my bag on my shoulder, and it was the first thing in 2 days that made me think I might do all right out here. A place that cooks badly is a place that needs a cook. I had walked a long way to find it, somewhere far enough from the capital that nobody would come looking for the coward they'd branded, close enough to a dungeon that adventurers passed through hungry and paid in gold. That was the whole plan. Cheap land, empty stomachs, a door with my name on the wrong side of it for once. The corner house sold itself before the owner opened his mouth. Good light through the front, morning sun that would fall right across a counter if I put one there. A draft came in under the back door and worried at my ankles, and I liked it. A draft you can work with, a draft that carries smoke out of a kitchen instead of trapping it. I counted gold coins into the man's hand and did not let my face show how few I had left after. Then I stood in the empty front room, listening to the draft, and let myself feel it for exactly one breath, mine, a room that answered to me. Furniture came next, and here the manual earned its weight. Every retired adventurer who opens a diner gets sold the same lie, the little book warned, that you need the expensive thing to look like a real shop. So I bought secondhand, a scarred table, 4 mismatched stools, a cracked but honest stove. The store owner was a wide, friendly man who followed me down every aisle. He steered me toward an icebox, a slab of azure crystal humming with cold, and told me at some length that no diner could keep meat without one. I nearly said yes. My hand was halfway to my purse before I caught myself and laughed, quiet, at my own face in the crystal. I've got my own ice, I told him, and I meant the skill, the one that comes to me easy as breathing. He didn't quite believe me, but he let it go graciously, the way a good salesman folds. I felt absurdly proud of that. A whole icebox of gold I hadn't spent. I was reading the manual's page on hiring a waitress. Later, when there was money, when there was a shop worth staffing, when 2 men at the counter drifted into talk I only half heard. Some far-off noble, they were saying. A collector, one of them called him. A man who bought up rare things and exiled things, the odd and the unwanted, and paid well for them. The other laughed and said good luck ever meeting him, and they moved on to the weather. I filed it under nothing. A rich man's hobby, a story to pass a slow morning. I had a stove to haul home. The words went quiet under the day's noise, and I let them. I have thought about that morning a great many times since. The square was where it went wrong, the way I knew it would the second I heard the bell. A debt bondage settlement had set up in the open. A low wooden platform, a knot of onlookers, a creditor working the crowd. They do it plainly out here, past where the capital keeps such things behind walls. When a house falls and the debts land on whoever's left, the creditors put the contract up and sell the years of work owed against it. Legal, ordinary. Nobody in that square blinked. On the platform stood a young woman with silver hair, thin inside a rough hemp shift, and the creditor was hyping her like a side of good beef. Daughter of a great house, he crowed, undone in some power struggle far from here. The parents exiled and the debt fallen to her, a rare offering, a noble's blood at a laborer's price. The crowd murmured, half of them doubting the story, half of them measuring her arms for how much work she'd stand. I told myself what I always told myself. A man can't feed everyone. I'd spent my last real coins on a house and a stove. I had nothing to spend on a stranger's ruin. I turned to go, and her eyes found mine. They were empty, not frightened, not pleading. That would have been easier to walk from. They were burnt out, like a stove gone cold with the door left open. A girl who had already stopped expecting anything from anyone in the square, me included. She looked at me the way you look at weather. I knew that look. I had worn that look a long time ago, in a city that wanted me dead of hunger and couldn't be bothered to watch it happen. I stood there in the dust with my heart doing something I told it firmly not to do, and I could not make my feet move. Because I had been fed once, when I had no reason to hope for it. I was small then, and homeless, the kind of hungry that stops being pain and becomes a sort of ringing quiet. It was raining the day a woman dropped her purse in the alley I slept in, fat with coins. Enough to eat for a month, maybe 2. I ran after her and gave it back. I still can't tell you exactly why. I've had years to think about it, and the best I've got is that I was too tired that day to be smart. She turned the purse over in her hands, rain running off both of us, and asked me, half to herself, what kind of starving gutter child chases a woman down to return the thing that would save his life? I didn't have an answer. I hadn't planned any of it. She looked at me a while longer. Then she told me to follow her and started walking, and did not check to see if I did. Her name was Joan, and she was the head chef of the finest restaurant in the capital, and she sat a soaking, filthy orphan down at a table meant for lords. The staff stared. She ignored them. She went back into her own kitchen and cooked for me herself. Plain fried rice and a bowl of soup. Nothing grand. The fast, honest food a cook makes when the food is the whole point and not the show. Egg and rice and a little onion. Steam coming off it in the warm room while the rain hammered the windows. I ate like an animal, and somewhere in the middle of it, without deciding to, I started to cry. The first time I could remember crying. The tears just coming, dropping into the bowl while I kept shoveling rice past them because I was too hungry to stop for grief. Jean watched me and said nothing kind and nothing cruel. She just let me eat. I took her name later when she let me stay. Blacks. I carried it out of that kitchen, and I carry it still, even after the fight that drove us apart. Even with an apology I never went back to say. That fried rice is the only inheritance I have ever owned, and a man pays an inheritance forward, or he isn't anybody at all. I turned back around before I could talk myself out of it. 2 men near the platform were haggling already. A merchant with a soft, greedy face arguing with the creditor over whether the silver-haired girl was worth more sold as labor or rented out as a curiosity for a show, a fallen noble to gawk at. I heard the word curiosity, and something in my chest went very cold and very quiet. The old kitchen quiet, the one from before the silver wing. I called out a bid. Heads turned. The merchant looked at me, took my worn boots and my cook's tunic in one glance, and raised me without much worry, the way you'd swat at a fly. So I raised him back. He grumbled that a find like her didn't come along often, and he meant to have her, and he climbed the price again. I climbed it with him. Coin I did not have, coin that was supposed to become tables and flour, and a sign over my door. I felt each bid leave me like a tooth. The merchant's face lost its softness as the number got serious. As he realized the shabby cook meant it, he hung on for 1 more, 2 more. Then he swore and threw up his hands and walked, and the creditor's hammer came down, and the years of her life belonged to me for almost every coin I had left in the world. She did not look grateful. She looked at me with those burnt-out eyes and waited to learn what a new owner was going to be like. I could have wept for the arithmetic of it. A house, a stove, and now a person, and nothing left to open any of it with. Instead, I climbed the platform, took her thin, cold hand, and got her down out of the sun. The house was still empty when I brought her home. 1 table, 1 stove, a draft under the back door. She stood in the middle of the room where I put her and did not sit, waiting for orders. "You've got a name?" I asked, crouching at the cold stove. She was a long time answering. When she did, she said it flat, like a fact about someone else. "I lost my name." She said whoever she used to be had been left behind with the house that fell, and there was no one to be anymore. I didn't push it the way you'd push a locked door. I pushed it the way you nudge a pot off the heat. If she'd lost the old one, I told her, she'd best pick a new one, because I was not going to spend the winter calling her, "Hey you." Something flickered. She looked at the window, at the last of the light on the wall, and after a moment she said quietly that I could call her Stella. "Stella?" I repeated, so she'd hear it land in a real room. All right. Then I took the indenture contract out of my coat, the paper that said her years were mine, the paper I had just emptied my life to buy, and I tore it in half, and in half again. She flinched at the sound like I'd struck her. I let the pieces fall on the bare floor between us. "You're not bound to anybody now," I said. "Not the creditors, not me. If you think you can make it on your own out there, the door's right behind you and I won't chase you." I meant it too, which was the frightening part. Nobody who came to my table was going to be owned the way I'd once been thrown away. Not in my house. Not for any price. Stella stared at the torn paper. She didn't run. She didn't do anything at all, like a person handed a word in a language she'd forgotten she knew. So I did the only useful thing I know how to do. I cooked. I called up flame under the pan and disinfect, over the rice and the cave serpent meat, and I made her fried rice. Egg, white rice, a little onion, thick cuts of thigh meat seared fast and hot. No icebox, no fine kitchen, just my 2 hands and the skills that come to me easy, in a house that had been empty an hour before. The smell filled the little room. It's a good smell. It has saved my life more than once. I set the bowl down in front of her, gruff as I could manage. "Here, eat." She picked up the spoon like she wasn't sure it was allowed. She took one bite, then another, faster, and then she was eating the way I once ate at a lord's table in the rain. Hunched, urgent, both hands, like the food might be taken back if she slowed down. And the tears came. They just came, running down over a face that had shown nothing in the whole square, dropping into the bowl while she kept eating straight through them, too hungry to stop for whatever was breaking loose. She wept and ate, and did not make a sound about either. I stood very still and let her. "Some things you don't interrupt. Is it good?" I asked after a while, low. "Stella," she nodded, hard, mouth full, tears everywhere, and promptly choked, went red, doubled over the bowl with a sound like a cat with a bone in its throat. "Whoa, hey, slow down. Nobody's taking it. Breathe." I was around the table and thumping her back before I'd finished the sentence. Cook's panic in full flight, ready to save her from the rice after saving her from everything else. And she coughed the lump loose and gasped, and, God help us both, almost laughed. A wet, cracked, startled little sound. The first one. She went right back to eating, slower this time. I sat down across from her and watched her finish every grain and told myself it wasn't much. One bowl of rice in an empty house I could no longer afford. But I know what a bowl of rice can be. I have been the starving kid it was set in front of. Eating is the first step out. Whatever the pain behind it, the body decides to keep going, and the rest follows the body. She asked me my name then, small, not looking up. "Dennis," I said, and that was the whole of it. No coat with silver wings, no party, no captain in gold armor deciding what I was worth. Just a cook, a girl he'd pulled off a block, an empty room with good light, and a draft under the door I could work with. It was almost nothing. It was the first thing in a long time that was mine, and hers, and no one's to take. I hung the short blue curtain over the door myself at midday, because there was no one to pay to do it, and because I wanted my own hands on the first thing anyone would touch. The sign in the window said Exile's Diner in Stella's careful letters. She had already turned it to open twice, just to watch it swing. We had 4 stools, one table with a wobble I had shimmed with a folded scrap of paper, and a stove that ran hot on the left. We had rice and oil and salt, and almost no coin, because I had spent nearly all of it on a girl and never once regretted it. What we had instead was a rule I had carried a long way. Feed the ones everyone else walks past. The first customer came in sideways, like the door might bite. Full armor, dented at the shoulder, a heavy sword too big for the room. The helmet stayed on. Whoever it was stood at the menu a long moment, then pointed at the 2 cheapest lines on it, a small rice and 1 pickled plum. I have watched a lot of people order food they didn't want because it was the only thing they could afford. You learn to read it in the hands. These hands were shaking, just slightly, and counting coins that weren't there. "Sit," I said. "I'll bring water." Stella brought it before I finished the sentence, set the cup down without a word, and went back to her spot by the wall in her white and pink apron. She had stopped flinching at strangers about a week ago. Small progress. I counted it anyway. The helmet came off, and it was a young woman under it. "Henrietta," she told me when I asked. She'd kept the armor on in the street so no one would clock her for a woman and refuse her the road. She said it plain, no self-pity in it, like a weather report. "Parties won't take a woman with a sword," she said. "They say we're weak, troublesome, so I go alone, and going alone eats coin faster than I earn it." I didn't answer that. I dropped a cave serpent cutlet in the hot oil, listened to it hiss, laid it over rice, and slid the bowl across the counter to her. She stared at it like I'd handed her a live thing. "I can't pay for this." "Then pay me someday," I told her, already turning back to the stove. "Eat it while it's hot. Cold cutlet is an insult to the serpent." She ate like she was afraid it would be taken away. Halfway down the bowl, her eyes went bright and wet, and she blinked it off hard and kept eating. And I let her have that privacy and pretended to scrub a clean pan. Stella watched her from the wall with that flat cat look of hers. Then she carried over a second cup of water without being asked, set it down, and went back to her corner. It was a small thing. A week ago, she would not have crossed the room for a stranger. I marked it the way I mark a sauce finally coming together, quietly, without saying it out loud, in case saying it broke the spell. By the second hour, the little room had filled. That still surprised me every time it happened. a room filling because of something I cooked. A young party sat by the window, 4 of them, and one waved his empty bowl at me and said the serpent cutlet was the best thing he'd eaten in the whole dungeon town. Their leader was a lean, easy-smiling fellow named Sterling, all warmth and open hands. When I mentioned they looked light on steel, he lit up. His party had been starving for firepower, he said, and here was a heavy sword knight eating 3 stools down. It fit too neatly. I remember thinking it fit too neatly and telling myself I was being sour. At the corner table, 2 young mage women were doing what regulars do best, trading gossip over cooling soup. One had her hair in twin tails, the other a long ponytail. I wasn't listening, exactly. A cook hears everything and keeps none of it. They were talking about vanishings. Solo women, they said, invited into a party all smiles, walked deep into a dungeon, and never walked back out. Robbed on some quiet floor and left for the monsters, while the party moved to a new town before anyone thought to count who was missing. 2 travelers by the window traded a lower roomer under that one. Some far-off collector, a man who paid gold for rare things and exiled things, anything the world had thrown away. I filed it under nothing and turned back to the rice, but the first rumor sat in me. When Henrietta stood to leave with Sterling's smiling crew, I caught her at the door. "Choose careful," I said, low, just for her. "Not every open hand wants to shake yours." She laughed, not unkindly, the laugh of someone who has finally been offered a seat at the table. She could handle herself, she promised. She'd felled bigger things than a bad party. And she thanked me, warm and full, for the meal and the party both, and went out into the afternoon with them. I stood in the doorway a while after. The draft under the door worked at my ankles. I told myself they surely wouldn't be that kind of party. I have rarely been more wrong about anything, and I knew it, even as I thought it. They went deeper than any gathering quest needed. I know because I followed. I'd closed the diner, told Stella I had errands, and gone down after them at a distance, hating that I was right to. Henrietta didn't see it. She was having the best day of her life. She dropped an imp in one strike, and they cheered her, and she pushed on when her legs were shaking, because praise is a drug to anyone who's been starved of it. By the time they reached a wall veined with glowing ore, she was spent, and the caster, a thin, oily man named Marlowe, offered to cast a recovery spell to bring her stamina back. The spell he cast was not recovery, it was stun. She went stiff and dropped where she stood, sword ringing on the stone. Sterling kicked the blade out of her reach, unhurried, and told her the truth of it with a smile in his voice. She'd been so easy, a little flattery, a seat at their table, and she'd walked all this way on her own 2 feet. Now they'd take what she carried and leave her here, and the floor would do the rest, and they'd be 3 towns gone by the time anyone found what was left. She couldn't move. She could only listen, and from the dark past the ore light, so could I. The corridor went quiet, the way a kitchen goes quiet right before the knife comes down. I had a paper bag over my head with 2 holes torn in it, and a grubby short-sleeved shirt, and a heavy cleaver in each hand. A man dressed like that is invisible to people busy being cruel. Under the bag, I was no one. No cook, no name, nothing anyone could trace back to a little diner with good light. That was the whole point of the bag. So I let the bag be someone else, and I walked out of the dark. The archer at the edge saw me first and reached for his short bow. I took his draw arm with the flat of a cleaver before the string ever tightened, and he folded around it and stayed down. No blood. Most of a cook's work is just knowing where a thing gives. Sterling turned and swung, all that easy warmth gone hard. I stepped inside the arc of it, close as a whisper, and the flat of the other cleaver caught him across the ribs and lifted him clean off the stone and into the wall. He hit it and slid and did not get up. Marlowe tried to start another spell. I crossed the gap before the second word left him, and the humming light in his hands went dark. He joined the others on the floor. The last of them, another caster, did the smart thing and the useless thing at once. He threw a search skill at me, trying to read what I was, how far above him, how much trouble. I felt it wash over me and slide off like water off a hot pan. He watched it fail. He said to no one that it couldn't be, that I was too far above him for the skill to even read a number. Then he turned to run. I was already where he was going. Then it was quiet again. 4 grown men who had walked in laughing were down on the wet stone in the cold ore light, one groaning, the rest still, and none of it had taken longer than searing a cut of meat on both sides. The whole thing had cost me nothing but the walk down. That was the part I wanted Henrietta never to understand, how little effort it had really been. 4 of them, not one death. I want that understood, because it would have been simpler to make it one, and no one down here would ever have known the difference. I chose the harder, quieter thing anyway. I bound them at the wrists and ankles with their own rope, one after another, the way you truss meat before a long cook, and I dragged them in a slow chain toward the daylight a long way up. Henrietta watched the last of it through half-closed eyes, paralyzed, seeing only a masked shape moving through men twice her weight, like they were furniture to be rearranged. She would say later that the man moved like a cook, economical, certain, no motion wasted. She wasn't wrong, but she never saw a face. I set her sword back in her open hand, and I was gone up the tunnel before the stun wore off and her eyes could focus. The bag went into an underground stream on the way out. By the time she could stand, there was no one to thank. The gate guards found them at dawn. 4 men trussed at the wrists and ankles, propped against the entrance stone like sacks left for collection, blinking in the first gray light with no memory anyone believed. 2 of them turned out to be faces off the guild's wanted board, a robbery crew that had done this before in 2 other towns, and moved on each time before the counting started. This time, the counting caught up with them. No one could say who had left them there. There were theories. There are always theories. None of them were a diner. Henrietta came back 2 days later, in her armor, her helmet under her arm this time. She stood in the doorway a while, the way people do when they've rehearsed an apology and can't find the first word of it. Then she came to the counter and gave it to me anyway. She'd been naive, she said. I'd warned her plain, and she'd laughed it off, and it had nearly cost her everything, and she was sorry for it. She'd learned her lesson. She said that part twice. Learned it cheap, I said, wiping down the counter. You walked out. Most don't. I nodded her toward a stool. Now order something. You're insulting my stove standing there. She hesitated over the menu a long time, chewing her lip. And then, quietly, like she was committing a crime, she ordered the top-grade steak set, the most expensive thing I make. Her whole reward for surviving was to finally buy the good plate. I told Stella to sit with her while it cooked, and Stella did, silent and steady at her side. And the 2 of them made an odd quiet pair while the steak seared and filled the room. The 2 mage regulars blew in on the tail of the afternoon, twin tails and ponytail, loud as ever. They wanted to know why the diner had been shut the day before. Closing on your second week? Ridiculous. What could a cook possibly have to do? I told them I'd had errands. One of them narrowed her eyes at that and let it go, because a new customer was coming through the curtain and I'd turned to greet him, and errands was all they were going to get. Henrietta ate her steak slow, savoring every bite of a thing she'd earned twice over. She never learned who wore the bag. To her, it was a masked stranger with a cook's hands who came out of the dark and went back into it. She thanked that stranger, out loud, to a room that pretended not to hear her. I salted the next pan and said nothing. The draft worked at the door. It was, all told, a good day's cooking. Henrietta had been working the same bowl for the better part of an hour, and I was about done pretending not to notice. You know, I said, scraping the flat top clean. There's a whole town out there full of parties who'd love a swordswoman who eats like she means it. She grinned around a mouthful and said the noodles were too good to rush. That was her answer to most things. She'd been a devoted regular for 2 days and a paying customer for none of them. And every morning I set out her plate, and every morning her tab got a little longer and her sword a little more rested against the wall. A night without a party is just a large, hungry person in armor. I kept telling her that. She kept agreeing with me and ordering seconds. The curtain lifted, and a beautiful young mage came in like she was walking into an argument she hadn't started yet. Blonde bob, doll's face, a mage's robe she clearly ironed herself. She stood at the board and read it the way some people read a will, jaw tight, weighing every line. I've watched men choose easier over a battlefield. Take your time, I told her. I meant it kindly. She took it as a challenge. Stella came out from behind the counter without a word, crossed the floor, and tugged her sleeve. She pointed at the board and said one thing, soft, fried rice. It's the thing for a moment like this. She blinked at her like she'd handed her a map. Fried rice, she repeated, and sat, and the fight went out of her shoulders. She talked while I cooked. She was going to be great, she said. Not good, great. The trouble with adventurers these days was that none of them wanted anything. They drifted, they coasted. It disgusted her. She'd been thrown out of a party once, she told me, for caring too much, for pushing too hard, and she said it like a medal instead of a warning. One day, she said, sliding her spoon through the rice like she was knighting it, I'll join the Silver Wing Battalion as a healer, the greatest there ever was. I've cooked for the Silver Wing Battalion. I didn't say so. Careful, I told her instead, plating her second helping. A man who's the only one who cares tends to end up the only one in the room. She waved that off. She was used to being told to want less. She paid exact change, down to the copper, no tip, and told me her name at the door like it was a thing I'd want to remember. Vivian Strange. Then she was gone, and Henrietta said young people go through phases, and went back to her bowl. She came back 3 days later wearing a grin she'd bought on credit. Shrimp fried rice this time, and she announced it before she sat down. She'd done it. She'd joined the Night Vale Company, the best party in town. They'd taken one look at her and known. Good for you, I said, and meant maybe a third of it. Then she told me the first quest, and the third drained right out. Rare ore, she said. The fifth layer. I kept my hands moving. A cook learns to keep his hands moving while the rest of him goes cold. I've a habit from another life, a way of looking at a person that reads the shape of what they can do. A search, the guild calls it, and it slides over most people and tells me nothing I need. I looked at Vivian while I turned the shrimp, and it told me plenty. She was low, not beginner low, just low. The fifth layer is not for low. The fifth layer is where you send people you've already decided to spend. Vivian, I set the plate down slower than I had to. The fifth layer's deep for you. Deep for a whole party twice your rank. She'd trust the Night Vale to keep her safe, she said. That was the point of a strong party. Let the strong carry the weak until the weak got strong. She said it so simply, so sure, and I stood there with a warning in my mouth that I couldn't make her swallow. I pressed her once more. Really, truly, would she be all right? And she laughed and stood and told me to have the crab ready when she got back. Then she paid exact change and walked out into a bright day toward a hole in the ground that had been dug for someone like her. I didn't cook well the next day. I oversalted a broth I've made 1,000 times. Stella noticed and said nothing, which is her way of saying everything. Then 2 men came in laughing, and I learned exactly where Vivian was. They wore the Night Vale colors, and they carried themselves like the floor owed them rent. They ordered, and they talked, and they didn't lower their voices because men like that never think the cook is listening. The captain's a devil, one of them said, delighted. Sends every fresh recruit down to the 5th floor alone, first thing, just to see who crawls back. Most don't. The other one laughed and said the skinny blonde one they'd picked up this week didn't have a prayer. Better to leave a thing like that as bait. Buy the rest of them time when the goblins came. Bait. I set down my knife. I asked them to leave. Politely, the first time. They found that funny too, and told me to mind my pots. And one of them put his boots up on my clean table. I don't remember choosing to move. I remember them being outside, and the door swinging, and my hands not shaking the way I wanted them to. I pulled my apron over my head. Stella, close up. Eat the leftovers. Don't wait on me. She met my eyes and held them. She doesn't spend words, so the ones she spends land hard. Dennis, a breath. Please be careful. I told her I always was. It's the biggest lie I tell her, and she lets me. Then I went to the dungeon, and I went down. What happened to Vivian before I found her, she told me after, in pieces. I've said it in the order it must have gone. They left her. Somewhere on the way down, the Night Vale Company simply weren't there anymore, and the torchlight went with them. And Vivian Strange stood alone on the 5th layer of a dungeon that ate people like her for practice. Then the goblins found her. She ran. She's honest about that. She ran until her lungs tore and her fine robe snagged, and then her foot came down wrong and a rope snapped tight around her ankle and yanked her flat. A snare. Old magic. The kind that's woven to hold, not to cut. She clawed at it and couldn't think, couldn't remember a single word of the dispel she'd bragged about, and the scrape of dull knives was getting closer in the dark. That was when the voice came. It came from the wall, from a hollow in the stone she hadn't seen, calm as still water. A girl's voice, unhurried, kind. Breathe, she told her. Look at the knot, not the dark. Now, the words slowly, after me, and she did. Shaking, weeping, she said the old dispel one careful piece at a time, the way the voice fed it to her, and the rope went slack and fell away like it had only ever been sleeping. She crawled into the hollow. It was just big enough for 2 to lie down, and it was warm somehow, and out of the goblin's reach. The girl was back in the dark of it, a shape she couldn't quite fix her eyes on. She said her name was Cynthia. They talked, the 2 of them, while the horde milled in the passage. They talked about being alone, about being the kind of person who always ends up quarreling, always ends up outside the circle, always sure it's their own fault. She told her it wasn't. She told her gently, like she'd had a long time to think it over. Then the goblins started massing at the mouth of the passage, more of them, and Vivian did the first genuinely great thing of her life. She decided to be the bait herself. If she ran out, drew them off, Cynthia could slip up to the 4th layer and live. Cynthia begged her not to. Wait for help, she said. We go together or not at all. But she'd finally found something she wanted more than being safe, and she kissed Cynthia's hand in the dark and told her to run when she saw her chance. And then she leapt out into the passage, waving her arms, screaming at a wall of goblins to come and get her. That's the picture I came around the corner to. One skinny mage with her arms out, a horde of goblins bunching to charge, and about 4 seconds between her and the end of a very short career. I've walked to the 24th layer of a dungeon alone and walked back up bored. The 5th floor's goblins were never the problem. The problem was reaching her before they did. I didn't have a cleaver drawn, and I wasn't going to. That's a different man's work, and I'd left him at home. What I had was the other trade, the alchemist's, and I had a passage the width of a doorway. I put my hand flat to the stone and pulled iron up out of the raw matter of the place, and I made it into the biggest thing I know how to make, a pot. A great black thick-bottomed cauldron, the kind you'd render a whole ox in, taller than the both of us, and wide enough to cork that passage like a thumb over a bottle. It came down between Vivian and the goblins with a boom that shook grit from the ceiling, and the horde ran face first into cold iron and stayed on the wrong side of it. Vivian sat down hard in the sudden quiet, staring at me like I'd walked out of the wall myself. "You," I said, and let the word do the scolding. "Made me close early." She started to babble. "Thank you, master. How did you? What is that?" And I told her the path was corked and it wouldn't hold all day and we were leaving, now, on our feet. I got 2 steps toward the way up before she grabbed my sleeve and wouldn't let go. Cynthia. She was still in the hollow. "We couldn't leave her," she said. "She'd saved her. We had to bring her out." I didn't want to look. Something in the way the passage held its breath had already told me what I'd find, and I've learned to trust that cold feeling. But she begged, so I took the torch and I bent down and I looked into the hollow where the kind voice had come from. There was no girl. There was a robe, dark with years, fallen in on itself the way cloth does when there's no longer much beneath it holding the shape. A few small bones, a staff, laid down neat beside her, like she'd only meant to rest a moment. Dust where the warmth had been. She'd been here a long time. I heard Vivian come up behind me, and I heard the exact second she understood. She made a sound I won't try to spell. She'd spent the worst hour of her life being comforted by someone who had been gone for years, and every kindness of it had been real anyway. "Is that?" She couldn't finish it. She was just talking to me." "I know," I said. I put my hand on the back of her neck the way you'd steady a pot that's about to tip. Sometimes the dead who died being kind keep a little of it back to spend on the next lost thing that comes through. She spent hers on you. She knelt at the mouth of the hollow and wept like something breaking. I let her. Some things you don't hurry. Then, gently, we gathered her up. The robe, the staff, the small light weight of what was left. And we carried her up out of the dark she'd been alone in. The guild receptionist went pale when we set the bundle on her counter. Then she went quiet and professional, which is the kindest thing a person in her job can do. She knew the staff. She pulled a ledger from the back shelf, one of the old ones, and turned to a page that had been waiting a long time to be closed. Cynthia Drake, a mage. She'd separated from her party on the 5th layer, years ago now, more than either of us had guessed, and she had never come back up. And after a while, they'd stopped writing to the space in the margin where you write when someone returns. Presumed lost. A young woman with her whole road in front of her, and then a wall, and then nothing. And then a very long dark in which she'd chosen to keep being useful to strangers who never even saw her. Vivian read the page over my shoulder. She didn't cry this time. Something had gone quiet and firm in her instead. And that worried me more and frightened me less than the weeping had. "She has family?" she asked. "None on record," the receptionist said. No one had come. No one had ever come. "Then we'll do it," Vivian said. "Not a request. Tonight." The town keeps a cemetery on its edge, and the ground gives easy at that hour, and I dig well. It's not so different from turning a bed of coals. You find where the earth wants to give, and you work with it. We buried Cynthia Drake as the light went out of the sky. There were no words we knew for her, so Vivian made her own. She knelt at the raw earth and thanked her. Then she thanked her again, then again, over and over, like each thanks was a stone she was setting down so she wouldn't have to carry it. And I stood a little back and let her spend as long as she needed, because someone burying a stranger who saved her is doing the oldest right thing there is. When she'd run out of thanks, she was quiet a while. The wind pulled at her ridiculous ironed robe, and then, small and plain, not shouted at all, she made her a promise. "I'm going to be the greatest mage in the world," she said to the grave. "Not so people will know my name." Her voice caught and steadied, "so that no one gets left in the dark again. So the next Cynthia, someone comes. Someone always comes. I've heard a lot of men swear a lot of oaths over a lot of full plates. I believe this one. It's the only kind that ever holds. The kind made quiet, to someone who can't hear it, with nothing to gain. Come on," I told her, when the cold had made its point. "She's not down there being sad about you. Don't you be sad at her." She almost smiled. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, and we turned back toward the lights of the town, toward a diner with the leftovers eaten, and a girl who'd asked me to be careful. "Master," Vivian said, on the road, "is the crab fried rice still on offer?" It was. I told her it was. Some promises you keep the small way. one plate at a time, and that's how you earn the standing to keep the big ones later. She walked a little taller the rest of the way home, and I let her think I hadn't noticed. It was near closing when the girl with the burnt-out eyes came to my door. I had the grill scraped down and half the lamps already out. Henrietta was nursing the last spoonfuls of a stew she still hadn't paid for, and Vivian was counting her coins twice, the way she always did, like the number might improve if she stared at it. An ordinary night. Then the bell over the door gave a tired little knock of sound, and there she was. A sage's robe hung off her shoulders, and she swayed on her feet like a candle somebody had forgotten to blow out. Stella reached her before I could say we were closed. "Let this one in," Stella said, her hand flat on the doorframe. "Please, just this last one." She wasn't asking me so much as telling me. Vivian's spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. Stella making a request of anyone was rarer than a free meal in this town. I looked the girl over. You cook long enough, you read a body the way you read a pan, where the heat is, where it's gone out. This one had nothing left in her, nothing at all. So I tipped my head at a stool and told her to sit down before she fell down. "Are you a customer?" Stella asked her, gentle, steering her by the elbow. The girl nodded, like the word cost her something she couldn't spare. Rachel, she'd give us later, when she could manage a name. For now, she was just another hungry person who'd wandered in out of the dark, and by my rules, that is the only introduction anyone ever needs. I put the daily special down in front of her, meat seared and folded through a sauce she plainly had never met, going by the way she stared at the plate like it might get up and leave. I didn't have her story that first night. I got it later, in pieces, some from her, more from the people who'd worked beside her. It went about like this. She'd been the pride of some small village a long way off. A genius, they called her. The kind a whole town scrapes its coins together to send to the magic schools in the capital. She went. She made sage early, younger than almost anyone, and the first thing she did with all that talent was hire herself out to the Night Vale Company so she could send the money back home. Every month, coins and a cheerful letter. The letters lied. She never once told them how it really was. How it really was this. A superior who found an error in one of her reports and stood over her for a solid hour about it, going and going. And when her eyes flicked to the clock, he took that as an insult and started the hour over again. He made her rewrite the whole thing. She sat alone at that desk under one dying candle and rewrote it into the night, and she still didn't finish. She hadn't eaten since morning. Lunch had gone by, then supper, and there was a quest waiting for her before dawn. She never let herself quit, and I understood why once I heard it. She owed a village. You don't hand back the people who believed in you a failure. So she swallowed it, all of it, and let them grind her down to the wick. Back at my counter, she picked up her fork like it weighed more than she did. She ate a few bites, slow ones. I watched her chew, and I watched something behind her face start to come apart, the way a seam gives when you've pulled at it too long. She got maybe 4 mouthfuls in. Then the tears came, and they weren't the polite kind. They came up out of her in a way she clearly couldn't stop and clearly hated. Both hands pressed to her mouth, shoulders going like a roof in a storm. Nobody said anything. Stella moved in close and just stayed there, a hand between the girl's shoulder blades. Henrietta, who can fill any silence, didn't. That's a thing I'll say for the people who eat at my place. When it passed, she stood, wiped her face on her sleeve, and apologized. She left half the plate. Then she was gone into the dark she'd come out of, and the bell knocked once more and went still. Vivian looked at the door, then at me. "Master, should someone go after her?" "And say what?" I wiped the counter down that didn't need wiping. When a person's carrying a full pot with both hands, you don't grab their arm. She's hungry, so I fed her. That's the part I get to do. I scraped her half plate clean into the bin and let it go. The rest of it she has to set down herself. Nobody can lift it off her but her. The next day went worse, which I would not have thought possible. Vivian told me most of this after, and Henrietta filled in the parts she was too rattled to. Rachel had slept only a couple of hours, and then jolted awake certain she was late, because she was. She got to the guild an hour behind and took the scolding for it. Out on the quest, she reached for the mana recovery herb every sage carries and found she'd left it behind. The one thing she wasn't supposed to forget, forgotten, and took the scolding for that too, in the middle of a fight with a monster in front of her and her own party at her back, sounding like the enemy. By evening, she'd walked to the clock tower and climbed to the roof, not to do anything, just to be somewhere nobody could reach her, somewhere high and quiet, where the going and going finally stopped. She stood at the edge and let the wind have her, and her body, which she had been spending like it was bottomless, simply ran out. She fainted where she stood. One moment, upright at the edge, page, the next folding, and then over. Vivian and Henrietta had been at the guild checking party listings and had seen her cross the square with a face like the end of the world, so they'd followed, quietly. The way you shadow someone you're worried about. There was no time to shout. Vivian threw out a soft palm, a cushion of air under her, and Henrietta simply jumped, armor and all, and caught the falling girl against her chest. They both hit the stones hard. Henrietta's breastplate crumpled like a tin cup. Neither of them let go. They carried her to me because they didn't know where else to take a person who'd come apart. And that, I suppose, is a kind of compliment. I put her in one of the rooms upstairs. She was pale as raw dough and burning through nothing. No mana left in her to burn. No reserve, the tank scraped down past the metal. I've seen it before, in the earnest ones especially. The world hands its heaviest loads to whoever won't put them down, and then acts surprised when they break under it. She's not sick in the body, I told Stella, setting a bowl of thin porridge by the bed for when she woke. She's sick in the heart. It's a real thing. Happens to the ones who care the most and get the least back for it. Stella pulled a stool to the bedside and sat, and I knew from her face she meant to stay there. I left the porridge and the candle and went back down to lock up. I didn't get to. There were men in my dining room, half a dozen of them, and at their front, a round, soft one who came in smiling like he owned the floor under my feet. Hopper, guildmaster of the Night Vale Company, the man who ran this whole stretch of country the way a boss runs a racket. He'd come for Rachel. He laid it out pleasant enough that the girl upstairs was his, contractually, and he had the parchment to prove it. He spread the papers on my nearest table like a man dealing a winning hand. According to them, Rachel owed the company a debt so enormous, no lifetime of sage work could clear it. Backlogged fees, penalties, numbers stacked on numbers until the sum became a cage. Leave the party, and she'd owe all of it at once, which meant she could never leave. I picked one up. I've read a contract or two in my life, and I've been on the wrong end of the clever ones. This wasn't clever. It was greedy, and greedy leaves marks. These are forged, I told him, flat, and set the page back down. The dates don't sit right, and the seal's been pressed twice. You wrote this last week and aged it by a candle. His smile didn't move, but his eyes did. He stopped pretending to be pleasant, and what was underneath was the usual thing, that this wasn't the capital, that out here, he was the guild and the law and the last word all at once, that everyone in this town answered to him, and that a cook who'd just opened his doors would be wise to hand the girl over before he learned how that worked. He said it was the last time he'd ask nicely. I told him she was under my roof, and that made her my business now. Upstairs, I found out later, Rachel had woken to the sound of Hopper's voice coming up through the floor, and she'd started to cry again. Quiet this time, the worn-out kind. She asked Stella why they'd bothered, why anyone had caught her. She said she was only a burden, that she made everyone around her poorer for having her, that she was so tired she couldn't find the bottom of it anymore. Stella, who barely speaks, who I'd heard string more than 3 words together maybe twice since I'd known her, sat on that stool and gave the longest speech of her life. She told Rachel that people were free to give up if they truly wanted to. She wouldn't take that from anyone, but she thought it was better not to. She said it plainly, like a fact she'd tested herself. There was a time, she said, when she'd wanted to disappear too, to just stop being anywhere, and she hadn't. She'd chosen to keep going, and the reason was simple and small and stupid, and it was that something good came along that she'd have missed. So first, Stella said, eat a good meal, something delicious, some fried rice. She tucked the blanket. Then decide. If you still want to leave it all behind after that, I won't stop you. But eat first. Downstairs, Hopper had run out of patience and moved on to threats a child could follow. If the girl didn't come out, his men would come back some night with fire. And my diner, my good light, my stubborn draft, the tables I'd sanded myself, would be a black square in the ground by morning. His men spread out to make sure I felt the size of it. I didn't move. I told him if a single ember touched my building, he would not enjoy what came back to him. And I meant it in a way I let stay quiet, because the quiet was the part he should have been afraid of. That was when the door opened again. She came in out of the cold like she'd been sent for, red steel over a black tunic, a long coat with silver wings running down the back, a slim sword riding her hip like it had grown there. Katie, the crimson swift sword of the Silver Wing Battalion, the strongest party the kingdom has, the one that serves royalty and doesn't answer to men like Hopper. She took in the room in a single glance and knew at once she'd walked into the middle of something. I watched it happen to Hopper. I watched the blood leave a fat man's face in real time. His whole operation topped out somewhere in the 40s and 50s. Silverwing keeps people past 90 in the back rows, where they wash the dishes. He'd built a little kingdom out of being the biggest thing in a small pond, and the ocean had just walked through his door in red armor and looked at him with mild curiosity. He folded so fast it was almost graceful. Suddenly, it had all been a joke, a misunderstanding, a bit of fun that got away from him, nothing anyone should take to heart. He swore on everything he had that he'd never trouble the girl again, and to prove it, he snatched Rachel's contract off the table, called up a thread of fire in his own shaking hand, and burned it right there, holding the flame until the last corner was ash and the cage with it. Then, he and his 6 men were out the door and into the night, and the bell knocked and knocked behind them. Katie watched them scatter, unimpressed, then turned to me and grinned like no time had passed at all. "You could have handled that yourself," Katie said, dropping onto a stool like she owned it. "You just like watching them run." I put a hamburger steak set down in front of her, because some things don't change, and she'd always eaten like she'd earned it. "Cheaper this way," I said, "less to clean up." Behind me, I heard Henrietta drop something. She'd just worked out that her landlord, the man who'd been nagging her about her tab, had been Silverwing. That quiet cook had stood in that party, the highest there is. Vivian's mouth was hanging open around a question she couldn't get out. I let them have their moment. It's good for them. Katie ate, and while she ate, she made her pitch, the one she always makes, that the battalion wanted me back, that a place was open for me the day I said the word, that she'd been worried about me out here, alone, playing house in a dungeon town where guildmasters threatened to burn my roof down. "No," I told her, not sharp, just done. "I like it here." She studied me a moment, then let it go, the way you let go of a thing you already knew the shape of. She finished the plate down to the smear, sat back, and told me flat out that it was still the best food in the world and that I was a criminal for keeping it out here where no one important could taste it. Then she thanked me for the meal and for making her drag herself all the way out to the country to eat it. And she left, silver wings going out the door into the dark. She genuinely saved us. I told her so before she went, and I meant that too. Katie is the one who never let go of me. I wasn't ready yet to think about what that would cost her later. A week later, Rachel came back. Not as a stray this time, on her own feet in the daylight, with some color returned to her. The company had no hold on her anymore. The ash of that contract had seen to it. She stood in my doorway in a borrowed apron and said she was all right now, and that she'd like to start with whatever she could manage. She wouldn't take charity. She wanted to earn her place. I understood that better than she knew, so I handed her a tray and told her table 4 was waving. The diner was thriving by then, full most hours. Stella flashing that little peace sign she'd taken up, which had somehow spread to all of them. Henrietta hauling plates between complaints. Vivian working the counter like she'd been born behind it. 4 of us now, 5 with the girl learning the trays. A house made out of people the world had set down somewhere and walked off from. She recovered. She'd go on to more than any of us guessed in time. But there's one thing I'll say, because it stayed with me. That first night, when she broke down over 4 bites of a plate she couldn't finish, none of us knew the real reason she was crying. Not the overwork, not the tower. Something underneath all of it that she carried up those stairs and never set down where we could see it. I didn't know it then, neither did she, quite. But it was there, in the room with us, the whole time. And it would be a while yet before any of us learned what it was. I'd burned through half a day's worth of skill, keeping pace with the lunch rush, and I was leaning on the pass, sweating like a kettle, when Vivian decided that was the moment to lecture me about waste. A proper cook rations himself, she told me, wagging a ladle for emphasis. Henrietta, 3 bowls deep into a stew she still hadn't paid for, agreed through a full mouth. Something about how I cooked like a man who thought the world ended at sundown. I told them both the world could end right after they cleared their tabs. Rachel was wiping down the far tables, still moving a little careful, the way someone does when their body only just learned it was allowed to rest. She'd taken to reading the customers now, curious about all of them. So when the bell over the door went and the man who walked in was dressed too well to be hungry, she went quiet. He was old, silver at the temples, a coat that cost more than my whole front window, gloves he hadn't taken off. His eyes went past me, past Vivian, and landed on Stella clearing plates by the counter. Then the man folded straight down onto my floor and started to weep. Henrietta's hand was on her sword before his knees finished hitting the boards. "Who's the old man crying on the floor?" She kept her eyes on him and asked me, low, whether she ought to deal with him. I told her to hold, because Stella had gone still, plate in both hands, silver hair falling across a face that never showed much of anything. And the old man was talking now, fast and broken, calling her his young lady, saying it was him, her head butler, that he'd finally found her. His name was Stevens, once the head butler of House Ashcroft, and, if you didn't know the name, Rachel would tell you, because she did, in a hushed rush from behind the counter. The greatest magical family in the kingdom, the top of the whole wizarding line, the highest blood there was, and Stella, apparently, was the heir to it. Stevens laid it out between the crying. Her uncle Joseph had schemed her out of everything, cast her from the house as a child, sold off, disappeared into the world, the way she disappeared into that auction block where I'd found her. But a hidden will had turned up. It named her the real heir, and the royal court had ordered a retrial to drag Joseph back in front of the law and answer for all of it. He begged her to come to the capital, to take back what was hers. Stella set the plate down, looked at the weeping old man on my floor for a long moment. "I don't want to go," she said, flat, final. She said the inheritance didn't matter to her, that none of it did, that she didn't want to go anywhere near that place ever again. Stevens started to protest, and she just turned her back to him, drifted 2 steps closer to me, and caught my sleeve in her fingers the way she does when the ground stops feeling solid. I got her alone by the kitchen once the old man had been sat down with tea he didn't drink. I'm not a noble. I don't care much for them, as a rule, but I've learned that a thing you leave unfinished has a way of following you home. And I didn't want Joseph Ashcroft, whoever he was, following her here, to the one place that was hers. So I asked her gently whether she really didn't want to go, and I told her the rest of it plain, that I'd come with her, that I wasn't sending her off to those people alone, that if she got there and hated it, we'd turn around the same hour and come straight back to the diner, and no one on this earth could make her stay. She was quiet a while, then she said she only wanted to finish it fast and come home. Then we finish it fast, I said, and we come home. Vivian, who had absolutely no business invited herself, delighted, asking if she could truly come along, promising to handle every scrap of etiquette since I'd embarrass us all inside a minute. She wasn't wrong about that part. Stevens brought Stella a black and purple dress that turned her into every inch the noblewoman she'd been born. Me, they poured into an off-the-rack formal suit that fit like a sack tied at the middle. Henrietta and Rachel would mind the diner. We locked the door, climbed into the carriage, and rolled out toward the Capitol. The Capitol came up out of the road like a second mountain range, all towers and banners, and more people than our whole town had ever held. Vivian hung half out the carriage window, gasping at every spire, until I told her she'd look like a country bumpkin and pulled her back in by the collar. Stella didn't look at any of it. She sat small against the seat, and somewhere between the gate and the courthouse district, her hand found the hem of my coat and closed on it and stayed. I thought about fried rice. I always think about fried rice when she gets like that. It's the one thing that's pulled her back from the edge before, the plainest good thing I know how to make. But there was no kitchen here and no time. So I just let her hold the coat and told her, quiet, that I was right here. "I want to go home," she said, to the window. "I know," I told her, "soon." The royal courthouse was built to swallow people. Ceilings you couldn't shout to the top of. Corridors that ate the sound of your boots. A judge met us at the drawing room door. Sebastian Cade, second of his rank, a lean man with a still face and careful hands. Stevens excused himself to go report that we'd arrived, and I noticed the sweat on him before he'd got 3 steps. A lot of sweat for a cool room. Sebastian explained the blood test. Before any court would hear the will, they had to prove by magic that Stella was who the will said she was. A drop of her blood, red against her late mother's and father's, and an item that showed the bond as plain as a stamp. The moment he said the word needle, Stella came apart. She backed into me, both hands fisted in my jacket, shaking her head, saying, "No, no," that it was scary, and I felt the old thing move under it. The years someone had handled her like property, the body remembering before the mind could catch up. Vivian crouched to her level, gentle as I've ever seen her, asking if she just didn't like needles, coaxing. "Let's go, Stella," I said. "I'm right here with you. One small thing, then we're done." We walked her in between us. The doctor was quick and kind, and murmured that it was only a little prick, and Stella squeezed my hand hard enough to leave marks and turned her face into my sleeve, and it was over in a breath. Afterward, she went limp, wrung out. All the fight drained off her at once, and I carried her to a chair. Sebastian worked the item over the sample, running it twice, once against her father, once against her mother. Both times, a red circle bloomed up out of the glass. "Related, first degree," he murmured. "The murdered lord and lady's own daughter, proven past any argument." Then he told me the rest, low, so Stella wouldn't have to hear it twice. Her father hadn't just died. He'd been poisoned by his own brother. Joseph had killed the lord, killed the lady, and thrown the child out to be sold, and worn the house like a stolen coat ever since. The Crown had finally forced the case back open. We'll win this. There was something under Sebastian's calm, a grudge, old and personal. He told me he'd suffered at Joseph's hands himself. I believed him. The next morning, the court convened. 3 judges on the bench, the eldest presiding. Our side of the room, Stella, Sebastian, Stevens, and me in my sack of a suit. The other side, Joseph Ashcroft and his people. He had Stella's silver hair. That was the first thing I hated about him. The same silver, worn on a smug, comfortable face. The moment his eyes found me, he made a little performance of it. The Silver Wing Battalion's disgraced cook, the coward who fed soldiers and ran, come to play guardian to a gutter girl. I gave it back to him, plain, until the presiding judge banged for order and told us both to sit down. They read the will first. The late lord had split his estate the old family way, into blood and into knowledge. Blood meant the wealth, the lands, the power, the name. Knowledge meant the library, the books. And blood, the will said, went to his daughter. That should have ended it. The test had already proven the daughter. Joseph's lawyer stood up instead and called Stella a bastard. Smooth as oil, he argued she was no true child of the lord and lady, the get of some lowborn mistress, a matter the previous ruling had already settled. Sebastian was on his feet at once, demanding the blood test be run again, right there, in open court, where every eye could see it clean. So they did it again, and I watched it happen, and still almost didn't catch it. First reading, Stella against her father. The red circle rose up, related, same as before. Second reading, Stella against her mother, and the glass filled with a cold blue cross, not related, a stranger's blood. Sebastian shouted that it was impossible, that we'd proven it twice yesterday, and begged for a retest. The presiding judge refused him, flat, no retest. And across the room, Joseph let a slow smile spread and said, mild as milk, that the result was the same no matter how many times you cared to run it. The bench conferred for the length of a held breath and handed down the thing they'd clearly decided before we ever walked in. Part of the will, they ruled, was false, and therefore part was void. And in the interest of fairness, that was the word they used, fairness, they proposed a compromise. Joseph would take the blood, the wealth, the lands, the power, the name, and Stella, poor illegitimate Stella, would be granted the knowledge, the books. The dusty old library nobody wanted. Joseph accepted before the judge had finished the sentence. I heard the whisper because I hear everything. It's a small skill and a useful one, and it caught Joseph leaning to the judge at his elbow, murmuring that handing off the dusty storeroom suited him fine, that it killed 2 birds, dumping the useless library on the girl and keeping his own hands clean of it. He didn't know what he had, but that's a later part of the story. What mattered right then was the sweat. Stevens was drenched, had been since the drawing room, and a cook learns to read hands the way other men read faces, where the heat is, where it's gone out, the little nick that says the knife slipped. So I crossed the floor to the old butler, and I took his hand and turned it over, and there on the meat of his thumb was a fresh cut, clean, deliberate, a day old, no more. You draw blood into an item to read a bond, and if the man handling the sample squeezes his own blood into it at the second reading, a stranger's blood, mixed with the daughter's, the glass reads exactly what we'd all just watched, a cold blue cross, not related. Why did you do it? I asked him, not loud. I didn't need loud. He crumpled the way he'd crumpled on my diner floor, except there was no love in it now, only fear. He confessed it in pieces, that Joseph had promised him the head butler's post back, his old life, if he'd only fix the second test, that he had a life to protect too. He said it like that was supposed to mean something to me. There's a lottery in these courts, a little ritual of tokens to pick who handles the sample, so no one can arrange to have their own man do it. I burned his jacket. One snap of flame, nothing that touched the skin, just cloth, and out of the lining spilled 2 lottery tokens onto the courtroom floor, one blank, one marked to win, both in the pocket of the man who'd drawn the handler's duty. The draw was fixed. The handler was Joseph's. The test was bought, and now it was on the floor for the whole room to see. You're all in this together, I said to the bench. I said it to the whole rotten bench of them, to the judge who'd refused the retest, to Joseph, to the room. I told them I was the one who was furious right now, and I meant to keep being furious until somebody honest was standing where they sat. The presiding judge didn't answer the charge. He called for order, and when the order didn't come, he called the night mages. Armored, sword drawn, they peeled out of the aisles and closed on me from 3 sides. And I'll be honest, some part of me wanted them to, wanted an excuse to put my hands on something and make one true thing happen in that crooked room. Vivian hit me from the side before I could. She wrapped both arms around me and drove me off my feet, hissing my name, telling me to stop, that if I swung on the crown's own knights in the crown's own court, they'd bury all 4 of us and Stella last of all. She took a shove meant for me and a bruise across the shoulder holding on. She was right. I hated that she was right. I stopped. They pulled the knights back. The verdict stood. Out in the corridor, the anger went cold and turned on me instead. I dragged her here. That was the whole of it. Stella hadn't wanted to come, had said so flat on my own diner floor, and I'd talked her into a fine clothes trip to a rigged room so a smug man with her hair could call her a bastard to her face and take everything the law pretended to give her. I told her I was sorry. I meant it down to the boots. She just looked up at me with that near blank face and shook her head. Once, like the sorry was the silly part. Sebastian caught us there. He was ashen. He swore he'd known nothing of the fix, and I believed that too. He was too angry to be lying, angry at his own robe. He told me the court would quietly overlook my outburst, not out of mercy, out of fear. A cook setting a butler's coat on fire in open session and shouting collusion at 3 judges was exactly the kind of scandal a bought bench needs buried, so they'd pretend it never happened rather than let anyone ask why the tokens were in that pocket. It wasn't justice, it was a receipt. Stevens had confessed in front of witnesses, and those 2 tokens had hit the floor where people saw them. Whatever else I'd lost in there, I'd walked out with that on record. Some debts you can't collect the day they're owed. You just make sure the ledger's written where it can't be torn out. The Knowledge Mansion was a wreck. Joseph had taken the palaces and left us this, a sagging old house at the edge of the grounds, choked with dust and spiderweb, books piled to the ceilings and gone soft with damp. Vivian sneezed her way through the entry hall. The floorboards groaned under us like they resented the weight. I remember thinking the villains had at least been honest about one thing. It truly did look worthless. Stella wandered ahead into the main room, quiet, running a finger along a shelf. Then the floor gave out under her. One rotten board, then the whole rotten patch, and she dropped straight through with a small, startled sound and was gone. My heart went through the floor after her. I was at the hole before the dust had settled, calling her name down into the dark. It hurts, came up, small and cross and entirely alive. She was fine, sitting on a stone floor a body's length down, rubbing her hip, blinking up at me. And around her, in the shaft of light we'd punched through the boards, the dark was full of shapes. We got a lamp down there, and Vivian nearly fainted. A vault, sealed under the ruin, untouched for who knew how long, shelf after shelf of ancient tomes, bound in leather and metal, and things I didn't have names for. Vivian went from title to title with her hands shaking, saying names like prayers. The Clockwork Manuscript, grimoires she'd only ever heard rumored, books she swore were world treasures scholars had spent whole lives just hunting. Sebastian stood in the dust and started slowly to laugh, not a happy sound so much as an astonished one. He said he thought he finally understood, that the late lord had known exactly what he was doing when he split the estate. Let the greedy brother snatch the gold and the name, the obvious prize, and steer the real fortune, quiet, to the daughter he couldn't openly protect. Joseph had spent a bought court and a murdered brother's whole scheme to win the wealth, and he'd handed away the one thing worth more than all of it, sneering about a dusty storeroom the whole way out the door. Stella, meanwhile, had already decided what to do with a vault of priceless world heritage. Put them in the diner, she said, so people can read them. Vivian made a sound like she'd been stabbed. She asked her, aghast, whether she truly meant to shelve world treasures in a restaurant next to the Daily Special, and she considered it and said yes. Where else would people read them? I looked at her sitting in that shaft of light with the dust in her silver hair, holding a book worth more than the capital, wanting only to share it with the regulars back home, and I felt the day's rot lift a little off my chest. She caught me watching, and she lifted 2 fingers in that small peace sign of hers, the one that means, in the whole quiet alphabet of her face, that things are as good as they get. We'd lost. I want to be honest about that. We'd walked into their court and their law had robbed her in daylight, and I hadn't been able to put a stop to it. Joseph was sitting in her family's house right now, wearing her name, thinking he'd won clean. He'd find out what he'd traded away. Not today. But the ledger was written, and we were carrying the real fortune home in a rented carriage, and some accounts only come due once the man who owes them has forgotten they exist. By the second week, I couldn't find an empty table in my own diner. They came for the books. Stella had carried armfuls of them home from that dusty mansion the court let her keep, and word got around the way word does. Now every chair held somebody hunched over a borrowed tome, mages copying diagrams onto their sleeves, old sages arguing in whispers over pages. Nobody outside a royal library had touched in a lifetime. One of them, A boy with ink to his elbows was reading the clockwork manuscript at the counter and forgetting to eat the stew I'd set in front of him. Rachel worked the door. There was a line down the street by noon, and she moved it along like she'd been born to it, calling out how long the wait was, telling folks the special before they'd sat down. I fed them anyway. A man reads better full, and a full man tips. Stella drifted between the tables with a stack of returns balanced against her chin, silver hair catching the light, setting each book back on the shelf like she was tucking it in. The girl who'd been sold off a block for the price of a bad meal now ran the busiest reading room in 3 districts, and she didn't seem to notice she'd done anything at all. "We're closing early tonight," Rachel told the last of the line, and there was a groan, and then she smiled and it stopped. "Thanks everyone, come back tomorrow." I wiped down the counter and thought for once that things were going right. That was my first mistake. We threw a farewell in the square because 2 of us were leaving. I built the fire up and got the meat going, and half the town wandered over the way they do when there's smoke and free food. Henrietta stood on a crate to make her announcement, cheeks already red before she'd said a word. "I finally got a real job," she said, and her voice cracked right down the middle. "I joined the night order. Boss, thank you for everything." She scrubbed at her eyes with the back of a gauntlet. "I'll come back with my first paycheck and clear my whole tab. I swear it." I told her the tab could wait. It couldn't. It was enormous. But a man doesn't collect on a night like that. Rachel went next, easier about it. She'd found a new party, real adventurers, and she was staying close by. Vivian sat beside me nursing a drink and watching all of it with that soft sideways look. "Everyone's leaving, huh?" Vivian murmured. Then a shrug. "I'll keep paying for my meals like always." I'd had a few by then, and the drink loosened something I usually keep bolted down. So I told them the name over the door, Black's, wasn't mine by blood, that I'd been a sous chef once, in the capital, under the head chef who took me in off the street and made me a cook, that her name was Jean, and that Black's was her name before it was ever mine, and that we'd fallen out hard enough that I left it and the city both. And then, quieter, into the cup, where I thought nobody could hear it, that in all those years under her, I never once reached level 100. That number is the ceiling for a cook. She stood on it. I never got there. That's just how it went. Stella pressed something into my hand. A skewer, the meat on it barely warm, red in the middle. "I think this is ready to eat," she said, solemn as a judge. It was not ready to eat. I ate it anyway, and told her it was perfect, and she gave me the smallest nod, pleased with herself, and for a second, the old regret didn't weigh anything at all. Then, somebody by the square's edge started shouting, and it wasn't a happy sound. The diner was burning, not smoking, burning, the whole front of it gone to a wall of fire that lit the street brighter than the sunset had. I ran. I don't remember deciding to. The heat hit me from 30 feet out, and I kept going until Henrietta caught my arm, because there was nothing in there to save that was worth a person, and I knew it, and I hated knowing it. 2 of my regulars, mages both, came dragging a pair of men out of the alley beside it, middle-aged, soot on their hands, oil smell coming off their coats. Night Vale Company. Everyone in town knew the badge. They'd come back to watch, and they hadn't known we'd closed early, so the mages had caught them still standing there admiring the work. I got in close enough to read a man's face by firelight, and the thing that turned my stomach wasn't fear on it, it was pride. One of them laughed at me, right in my face, over the roar of my life's work coming down. He named them like he was reading off a receipt. The Silver Wing Battalion had put in the order. House Ashcroft had paid for it, and a man like me, he said, was already finished. We just hadn't fallen over yet. Joseph. Of course it was Joseph. He'd walked out of that courtroom thinking he'd won clean, and this was him making sure. Behind me, the roof gave way with a sound like a dropped stack of plates, and Henrietta was crying, and Stella had gone very still and very white, and I stood there and watched everything I'd built turn into light and ash. The town helped us kill the fire before dawn. It didn't matter much. What was left was a black box with the roof gone and my chairs turned to charcoal. I found one that would still hold weight and sat down in it. Somewhere under the wreck, the strongbox had come through. I'd always kept the earnings where fire couldn't reach, so we weren't quite beggars. It felt like the smallest thing in the world. Vivian crouched in front of me and laid it out, because somebody had to. Joseph Ashcroft gave the order through the Silver Wing Battalion, and the Silver Wing handed it down to the Night Vale Company to actually strike the match. The greatest noble house in the kingdom and its strongest adventuring party pointed at one burnt diner and the cook who ran it. "That's the whole coalition," I said. "That's every one of them." Stella sat on the floor beside my knee. Her books were half of them ash now, curled black at the edges. "I only wanted to make the customers happy," she said, very small. I looked at her, and I made the decision that felt like mercy. "I'll take Stella somewhere quiet." My own voice came out flat and far away. "A village, out past all of this. I'm worn out. I always thought I was strongest on my own, but I can't stand in front of all of that alone, and I won't watch it fall on the rest of you." Nobody answered for a moment. Rachel and Vivian just looked at me. Henrietta was still wiping her face. I stood up to go find a bag. I got as far as the road out of town with a bag on my shoulder and Stella at my side, and the road was full of people. They'd come in the dark without anyone calling them. Half the square, more, my regulars, the mage sisters, faces I knew from the counter, and faces I only half remembered. All of them standing shoulder to shoulder across the way out. And at the front, arms crossed over a belly like a barrel, the general goods merchant Porter, who loves exactly two things in this world, and one of them was glaring at me. "I won't forgive anyone who dares hurt Stella," Porter said, and didn't move an inch. I told them to step aside, that this was mine to carry, and carrying it away from them was the only way I knew to keep them out of the fire. Rachel stepped up. She's a quiet one, so it landed harder. "I understand what kind of person you are now, Dennis," she said. "You can't stand to watch other people get hurt, but you don't mind being hurt yourself. A beat. That's not the same as being strong." Then Vivian was in front of me, that soft face gone fierce. "If you're sad, we're sad. When people who truly want you here are standing right in front of your face, you stop. You look at them." Vivian threw an arm out at the whole crowd. "Look at them." I looked. Henrietta, chin up now, done crying. The mage boy with the ink on his arms. Porter, a green-haired man near the back I'd fed a dozen times. People I'd pulled out of their own worst nights, standing in mine. "When do we set out for the capital?" somebody called, and the crowd made a sound like a wave. Stella took my sleeve. She looked up at me, and she said the thing that broke it open. "We should have a name," she said. "The people who got thrown away, and then found somewhere. The Exiles' Diner." She thought about it. "That's all of us." I stood in the middle of the road with a bag on my shoulder I suddenly couldn't remember packing, and the last of the fear went out of me like heat out of a pan pulled off the flame. I'd tried to run because I finally had something I couldn't stand to lose, and they'd walked out into the dark to tell me I wasn't allowed to lose it alone. I let the bag drop. "The Exiles' Diner," I said, loud enough to carry. "And every cheerful fool in this town who came out here tonight." I raised my fist and I meant it all the way down. "Joseph burned our home, so we're going to the capital and we're going to take his." The counterattack started right there in the ashes, at the top of the crowd's roar. Stella lifted 2 fingers beside me in that little peace sign of hers, and this time I didn't feel like a man who'd lost anything. We went to the capital in pieces, on purpose. The Night Vale Company had eyes on the roads, so we traveled small and quiet. A few of us in one carriage, a few more the next day. Nobody with enough people around them to look like an army. Let them count us wrong. An enemy who thinks he knows your number is an enemy you can surprise. By the time we'd all trickled in, the city was ours in a way it didn't know yet. Rachel and Vivian took the mages and the scholars. Half our old customers had come to the diner from somewhere, and every one of them knew somebody. And Vivian stood in the middle of a side street with a hand cupped to her mouth. That soft palm trick she does that throws a voice across a whole square, calling folk into a line to be measured and sorted. "One at a time," she sang out over their heads. "We'll be quick." Porter ran the supplies, and Porter runs supplies like a man storming a wall. "Move it," he barked at a boy with an armload of crates. "Think while you move." He could turn a lazy shopkeeper into a merchant in a week, mostly out of terror. The green-haired man found us there. He'd been at the diner the night the town blocked my road. His hair had gone that color from pushing his own magic too far, and he pressed a book back into Stella's hands and bowed almost to the ground. His wife was alive because of us, he said. He worked wind. He would give us every gust he had. Stella, meanwhile, had gotten hold of a broken thing, a big shoulder-mounted sound amplifier, wind-powered, dead in its casing. She turned it over and over. "Interesting shape," she murmured, and I made a note of that, because when Stella goes quiet over a broken machine, something usually happens later. We had the mages, the muscle, the wind, and the logistics. Henrietta had gone ahead to the one honest judge we knew. What we didn't have, the only thing the whole plan hung on, was a where. Black's restaurant sat where it always had, on the best corner in the capital. White cloths and silver, and a doorman who looked at my scorched boots like they might stain the floor. I got 3 steps inside before a waitress dropped a plate. "Everyone!" she shouted into the kitchen over the smash of it. "Deputy Chef Dennis is back!" They came out in an apron-flapping stampede. Cooks I'd sweated beside for years, older now, crowding around and grabbing my shoulders and talking over each other. "You're back? We heard you left the battalion. Where have you been?" I'd braced for this all the way from the door, and it still got under my guard. A woman came through them in a blue deputy's hat and made them give me room. Hazel. She'd been a line cook under me once. She wore the hat now. She took it off her head when she reached me, both hands, like it belonged to somebody else. I've never once thought of myself as more than acting deputy, she said. Welcome back, Deputy Chef Dennis. I told her the hat suited her better than it ever suited me. She didn't argue, which is how I knew she'd earned it. Then she glanced toward the back. Toward the kitchen door, nobody walked through without knocking, and her voice dropped. She's in the back. She already knows you're here. A small pause. She's known since you came through the front, probably. You know how she is. I did know how she was. My mouth had gone dry as flour. Hazel led me to the door and then, kindly, did not follow me through it. Jean stood at the pass with her back to me, tasting a soup, and she didn't turn around. Tall black hair pulled tight, straight as a knife in her whites. Level 100, the greatest chef alive, and everyone in that kitchen knew to move around her like weather. She set the spoon down, tasted it again, made me wait because she could. Who else? She said finally, to the pot. But the fried rice idiot. 7 years since I'd walked out of this kitchen, and she picked it up like I'd stepped out for salt. I told her the soup was oversalted. It wasn't. She snorted, which from her is the same as an embrace. She turned then and looked at me the way she reads a dish, all the way through, cost and all. Whatever she saw, it made her set her jaw. You've changed, she said. It wasn't a compliment, and it wasn't not one. Then, softer, an old thread picked back up. Did you ever find your answer, your 100? I told her no. I told her I still hadn't reached it, and maybe I never would, and I'd stop pretending that was the wound I thought it was. I laid it all on her counter instead. The girl I couldn't let be sold, the diner full of readers, the men who burned it down to the studs, Joseph Ashcroft, and the silver wing behind him, and the Night Vale match in between. And the one thing I'd come across a kingdom to ask her for. Somewhere in this city, 4 of them sat down to dinner in a private room. Joseph, the Silver Wing's Captain Victor, the Night Vale's man Hopper, and a judge they'd bought. I didn't know when, I didn't know where, but 30 years of feeding the powerful had put Jean's cooks in every private dining room in the capital, and there was no table in this city she couldn't find if she wanted to. I can't back down this time, I said. I need the where and the when. The steam hissed. A pot lid rattled and settled. Jean looked at me for a long moment, and something moved behind her eyes that had nothing to do with the favor and everything to do with the 7 years and the name over my burnt door that used to be only hers. Ruining a man's meal, she said slowly, is nothing for a chef to be proud of. And then she said nothing else. She just held my eyes across that hot kitchen and didn't say yes and didn't say no, and let the silence stretch until it was carrying the whole weight of both of us. The debt I was chasing across the city, and the older one standing right here between us that neither of us had ever once said out loud. I held the look and I waited. Some accounts you can only collect in person. This was one of them, and I wasn't leaving her kitchen until I knew which way it fell. She turned the soup off before she answered me. She set the ladle across the rim of the pot, square, the way you leave a thing when you mean to come back to it, and only then did she look at me. The private room at the Old Marrow House Hotel, she told me. 3 nights from now. A late supper, sealed doors, no staff but the ones they trust. She named the hour. She named the men who would be at the table, and there were 4 of them, and I already knew every name. I didn't thank her the way you thank a stranger. 30 years of her connections had just landed in my hands, and both of us knew what it cost her to spend them ruining a man's dinner. Ruining a meal is nothing to be proud of, she added, and turned back to her pot. But she said it soft, and she didn't tell me to stop. I had 3 days. It was enough. Everything I needed was already breathing down in that ruined town of ours, waiting to be pointed. Henrietta had the judges. Rachel had the mages. Porter had the wagons moving. Vivian had a plan that made me laugh out loud the first time she pitched it, and then made me agree to it, which tells you how far gone I was. I went out through Jean's kitchen door and started the last of it moving. I wasn't in the room yet, but we had a shell the size of a fist collecting every word inside it, so I can tell you exactly how the supper went, the way I heard it later, clean as a recording. 4 men at a round table under the blue light. Joseph, sleek and silver-haired, tearing into his food like the manners had been bred out of him. Victor across from him in his gold and blue armor, still and watchful, a level 99 swordsman who never quite relaxed. Hopper beside him, the Night Vale man, loyal and not half as clever as he thought. And the 4th chair held the highest judge of the royal court, old and soft and comfortable, a man who sold verdicts and slept fine. Joseph was in a mood to gloat. He talked about my diner like it was a stain he'd finally scrubbed out. The little shop that had hidden his niece, gone now, ash and nothing. Victor confirmed it flatly. Complete. Nothing left. And the two of them turned the talk to the mansion next. Whether to burn that too, whether Stella was worth the trouble of hunting down properly. And the judge chuckled that with a great noble, the court, and the strongest party in the kingdom all at one table, nothing could touch them. They heard the noise outside, a rising hum, the sound of a crowd gathering somewhere down the street. Victor wanted to check it. The judge waved it off. Some festival, some fool. No need to show their faces over a little music. Then the door opened and a small blonde waiter slipped in with a covered dish, cap pulled low, and stammered that the cook had forgotten to send this one out. Joseph nearly barked him back into the hall, but the cover came off and the smell hit the table, and Joseph went quiet the way only a glutton goes quiet. He tried the fried rice. He forgot to be a noble for a second. He demanded to know who'd made it, demanded more of it, demanded the cook be brought to him so he could hire the man on the spot for his own kitchen. The waiter dipped his head, promised to fetch him at once, and left with a smile the four of them were too pleased to notice. That waiter was Vivian, and the cook was already in the hall. I came in slow, carrying a fresh plate. I want to be honest about how I looked, because it matters. I had a brown paper grocery bag pulled down over my whole head, 2 holes torn in it for eyes, and a heavy cleaver hanging from each hand. I'd worn that same stupid mask the night I saved Henrietta, and it had put a ghost story into the mouths of half the guild, the masked man with the cleavers. Tonight, I wore it into a room full of men who'd spent a year deciding I didn't matter. I set the plate down in front of Joseph, careful, like service. 3 of them just stared at the paper bag, caught between confusion and a laugh. A masked lunatic with kitchen knives. It's not a thing you have a reaction ready for, but Victor didn't laugh. Victor had gone very still, and I watched the color move out of his face because Victor was the only one at that table who could feel the size of what had just walked in. He couldn't place it yet, but some animal part of him had already stood up and started backing toward the door. I told them the cook they'd been asking for was me, master of the fried rice they couldn't stop eating. And then I reached up and pulled the bag off my head, and I let Joseph see who he'd invited to supper. Joseph nearly went over backward in his chair. I let him scramble. I told him, plain, what he'd taken from me. The diner, the library inside it, every rare book my people had carried in. Half of them gone to ash on his word. I said it without raising my voice, and I watched him try to turn it into a misunderstanding, then a negotiation. He'd rebuild it, he said, twice the size. Whatever I wanted, name it. He was a reasonable man. I told him I didn't want it rebuilt by the man who burned it. Victor got to his feet then and put himself half in front of Joseph, and I heard the truth under his careful words, that he'd fight if he had to, but he couldn't promise to keep all 4 of them alive if it came to that. Even his own allies weren't worth his neck. I filed that away. Then I used the dread voice. It's an ugly skill, and I don't like the taste of it. It reaches past a man's reason and grips the animal underneath and squeezes until the animal will do anything to make the fear stop. I put all of it on Joseph. I told him to say what he did, to say it out loud, all of it, every name. And the great Joseph Ashcroft, sweating through his fine crimson coat, broke. I ordered it, he said. The words came out of him in a rush, like something he had to vomit up to survive. I ordered the fire, the diner, the books, all of it. I gave the word, and everyone at this table carried it. The battalion moved the men. The company lit the match. The court agreed to look away. My niece was supposed to disappear the same night, and I'd have burned the mansion over her too. It was mine. The order was mine. Are you happy? It was me. The room rang with it. Hopper had gone gray. The judge had stopped breathing. Even Victor closed his eyes for 1 second, because a man that sharp knows the exact shape of a mistake the moment it's finished being made. That was when I told them about the shell. I explained it the way you explain a joke to the person it's on. There was a conch-shaped little item sitting in the corner behind the wine, gathering every sound in the room. Vivian and the green-haired mage had rigged it with a soft palm membrane to throw the sound clean out through the wall, out to the street, out to the crowd they'd waved off as a festival. That crowd was a pop-up diner. Open air, free food, set up that same afternoon with Jean's chefs and Hazel running the pass. And it had pulled in mages and researchers and scholars from half the kingdom, the exact people whose respect a noble like Joseph lived and died on. Every one of them had just heard him confess, in his own gluttonous voice, to arson and attempted murder. Joseph's confession hadn't stayed in the room. It had gone to everyone who mattered, all at once. Down the hall, a window banged open. The conspirators' 2 aides bolting the moment they understood, out and down toward the street. I didn't chase them. I didn't have to. I had people for that too. Outside, the confession landed like a dropped tray. For a breath, the whole street just stopped chewing. Then it turned. Hundreds of the kingdom's sharpest minds, who had all read about the noble houses and mostly believed the polite version, standing in the lantern light, hearing a great lord admit to burning books and hunting a girl. The green-haired mage stood at the center of it with the conch cradled in both hands, keeping the sound clean, his face gone pale under the strain. The 2 aides picked that exact moment to come out the upper window on a rope, thinking a crowd meant cover. It didn't. Rachel had been standing quiet at the edge of the light the whole night, and she moved before I could have told her to. A snap of magic that plucked them out of the air and set them down hard in the open. Henrietta was on them the next instant, broadsword still on her back, just her hands and her weight, folding both men down onto the cobbles like she was tucking in a bedsheet. "That's the pair," Henrietta called out, cheerful as anything. "Complete." And in the middle of all of it, near the front, a small silver-haired girl in a waitress apron lifted 2 fingers in a little peace sign, quiet and pleased, because Stella had wanted, more than anything, to make her customers happy. And tonight, her customers were the whole angry kingdom. The books had burned, but the truth hadn't. And I stood up there in the broken window and thought, that's the part he never understood. You can burn a building. You can't unsay a thing 400 people just heard. Victor didn't run. I'll give him that. He came through the wall instead. One punch caught me square and put me through the stone and out into the plaza, and I came up spitting grit while the whole crowd scattered back to make a ring. He walked out after me through the hole he'd made. Sword lit a dull blue, and I understood we weren't going to do this with words. So here's the honest math of that fight. Victor was a real level 99 frontline warrior. One thing, done perfectly. A lifetime of it. Every blow he threw could shatter what it touched. I was level 99 too, but I'd spent mine on 40 things instead of 1. Cook, alchemist, brawler, none of it sharpened to a killing point. I fought the only way I had. I alchemized cleavers out of the air and parried, and each parry cost me the blade. 2 hits, and it was scrap, and I'd conjure another. I threw smoke and read him by the drag of air and the sound of his boots when I couldn't see. Rachel's voice cut across the plaza, telling anyone listening it was insane. I was still standing against that skill set. Vivian couldn't even follow what I was doing. Stella had both hands knotted in Henrietta's sleeve, watching me get slower. Because I was getting slower, he launched 8 spears of purple light at me in a fan, and I ate 2 of them getting clear, and he closed the distance and hit me clean, and the plaza went sideways. I skidded on my back across the stone and stopped, and for a second, I didn't get up. Flat on my back, I did the thing you're not supposed to do in a fight. I remembered a starving kid who'd have died in a gutter if a stranger hadn't put a bowl of hot fried rice in his hands, and how that one warm meal had made him cry, and how the whole rest of his life had been an argument with that memory. I hadn't picked up a knife to be the best. I'd picked it up because a warm plate can put strength back into a person who's got nothing left, and I'd wanted to be the one holding the plate. And I remembered John, years back, telling me flat that I'd never reach level 100, that I was missing something. And then the part I'd never understood until right then, lying in the dust with a level 99 sword coming down. Level 100 isn't a place you arrive, she'd said. It's not a destination, it's a process. I'd been chasing it like a summit, a thing to stand on top of and be perfect. That was the whole reason the door had stayed shut. I didn't want to be perfect. I wanted to feed my people and keep them warm and standing, and I would get up off this stone for them, whether I was strong enough or not. So I got up, and the door opened. The light came out of me all at once, every color there is, a rainbow bright enough to wash the moon out of the plaza. I felt the ceiling I'd lived under my whole life just leave, level 100, and with it folded into my hands like it had been waiting there the entire time, a skill that was only mine. Forced eviction strike. I named it out loud without meaning to, the way you'd throw a drunk out of your shop at closing. Victor swung, all his perfect killing weight behind it, and I stepped inside it and I evicted him. He didn't survive the fight standing up, and that's the most I'll say, because I didn't want him dead. The strike took him off his feet and threw him the length of the plaza and put him down at the bottom of a crater in the stone, out cold, armor cracked, done. no blood on my hands, just a big quiet hole in the ground where the strongest warrior in the kingdom had been, and a level 99 legend lying in it, breathing, beaten, and finished. Nobody in that plaza made a sound for a moment. Hundreds of the kingdom's finest minds had just watched a diner cook break a ceiling. Their books said couldn't be broken, and none of them had a word ready for it either. I didn't feel like a legend. I felt like a man who'd finally understood one thing his teacher told him a decade too late, and paid for the lesson with every muscle he had. The rainbow light faded, the plaza came back, and I was so tired I could barely stand in it. My legs went out from under me. I never hit the ground. Henrietta got there first and caught me under one arm, and then there were hands everywhere, my whole crew, holding me up in the middle of a plaza that was starting to cheer. "Boss?" Henrietta was half laughing, half crying into my shoulder. "You did it! You actually won! Fried rice party tonight," Vivian announced to the entire street, which was the most Vivian thing I have ever heard. I got the words out with what I had left. I told them I was spent, completely spent, and that I wanted fried rice, and that somebody else was going to have to make it this time. Rachel snorted and said they'd make it together. Fair enough. And a small hand came up in front of my face, a fist, waiting. Stella, silver hair and a tiny serious face, offering me a bump. I lifted my own fist about halfway and tapped hers. Then I let go and slept, right there, held up by every person that pile of ashes had been trying to take from me. By first light, the law had nowhere left to hide. 400 witnesses and a confession in the man's own voice. Even a bought court couldn't swallow that. Sebastian Cade had brought judges of his own who'd heard every word, and they moved fast, because moving fast was the only way any of them looked clean now. They led them out at dawn, and the whole town came to watch it happen in the open. Joseph first, his fine crimson coat wrenched and dirty, his hands bound, all the gloat gone out of him, and nothing but a fat, frightened old man left underneath. Then Hopper, the Night Vale man, hollow-eyed. Then the highest judge of the royal court, hands tied like a common thief, which I'd have paid money to see and got for free. And last, carried more than walked Victor, awake now and silent, watching the ground. The Night Vale company came apart within the week. You can't hold a company of shadows together once the leaders are in a cell and the names are all public. It just dissolved. And the strongest party in the kingdom, the Silver Wing battalion that had thrown me out like spoiled stock, Katie took the captain's chair. She'd been the vice captain all along, quiet and dangerous. And I'd long suspected she'd nudged a good deal of this exactly where it went, for reasons of her own that pointed back at me. She inherited them, all right. But here's the joke of it, the one only I was really in on. The men who'd exiled me had never once figured out why the Silver Wing won. It wasn't the swords, it was the meals I'd been cooking them the whole time, the quiet strength on every plate. Buffs they never knew to thank. They'd thrown that away with me, and now, watching them stand in the gray light without it, anybody with an eye could see it. The strongest party in the kingdom wasn't anymore. They'd burned their own kitchen down a year ago, and only just started to go hungry. We rebuilt it. Of course, we rebuilt it. New timber over the old footprint, new glass. A new sign we hadn't hung yet because we were still arguing about what to paint on it. The mages and sages had taken the burned books away in careful stacks and sworn they could bring a good number of them back, and I chose to believe them because hope costs nothing before noon. Stella wanted a name. She stood in the middle of the fresh swept floor and declared that Adventurer's Diner was far too ordinary. And before I could get a sensible word in, she'd landed on the Exiles' Diner. I fought it. I said it was a bit much, that I wouldn't walk into a place with a name like that. Vivian tilted her head, considered it, and told me she thought it was great. She liked it. Stella flashed her peace sign. I was outvoted in my own restaurant by the two of them inside about 30 seconds, which is roughly how every argument in that building ends. So the Exiles' Diner it was. The place for the ones who got thrown away and found somewhere anyway. I grumbled. I hung the sign. Somebody asked that morning whether Stella meant to go claim House Ashcroft now that it sat empty and hers by right. She's the rightful heir. Nobody would have stopped her. Stella looked up from wiping a table, thought about it for about as long as she'd thought about the name, and went back to wiping the table. Sebastian and the mages could sort the great house out. She had customers. They came through the door in a flood. The two mage sisters, hollering congratulations on the reopening. A pair of cocky lads who swore up and down they'd been the real heroes of the whole operation, sneaking about as waiters, and ordered the house special for their trouble. Porter rolled in last, that mustard coat straining over his belly, chuckling that he supposed he'd have something too. Henrietta put in for the regular crab fried rice before she and Rachel left for their new roads. Rachel took the daily set. I tied my apron, and I stood at the pass over a hot pan with my whole strange found family loud around me, and I called it out the way Stella made us call it every time from then on. Welcome to the Exiles Diner. Peace sign is free, Stella told a table of new customers, deadpan as a ledger. A smile is 1 copper coin. Calling me master is 3. They laughed like she was joking. She wasn't, and they paid. I scraped the pan and let the diner be loud around me. This was the part I'd never say out loud, that after the fire and the trial and everything I'd burned down to win back this corner, the best sound in the world was the ordinary racket of a full room at noon. One of the twin-tailed mage sisters leaned over the pass and asked, for the 3rd day running, whether we might host a little music festival. I told her I was swamped and to take Stella. She pouted. I kept cooking. Then the door swung, and Vivian came in and dropped onto her stool with the sigh of a woman who'd walked all morning. She ordered the usual before I could ask, which meant fried rice, and while it hissed, she caught me up. Rachel had landed a lecturer's post in the royal capital. Henrietta was up to her neck in knight candidate training, and, by the sound of it, losing. They're all doing well, Vivian said, and she meant it, and there was only a little ache under it. A man at the corner table said something to his companion, low, about a collector out east, a lord who bought up rare and living things for a private menagerie. Just gossip. It slid past under the noise. I filed it and forgot it, the way you forget a draft until winter. Stella flipped the sign and started counting the till. Then she stopped counting, and she went to the window, and she was out the door before I'd wiped my hands. There was a woman collapsed on our step. We got her inside between us. She was heavier than any woman her size had a right to be. Dense, wrong, like lifting a person made of packed sand. And she was hot. Not fevered, hot. My palm came off her arm the way it comes off a kettle. What is this heat? I said, more to the room than to anyone. Vivian pressed the back of her hand to the woman's cheek and yanked it away. She's burning up. This isn't a fever, Dennis. This is… The woman's eyes opened, pale gold, glassy, focused on nothing. In a flat, careful voice, spaced like a clock ticking, she announced that her internal temperature had reached critical and requested assistance, promptly. Then she reached to the center of her own chest plate and worked a small latch, and a panel set into it snapped open. White steam hissed out in a hard jet, and under it, where a heart should have been, there were gears, springs, little bright minerals turning in oil, and behind all of it, glowing steady, a red gem the size of a fist. Stella crouched to eye level and stared into the works with frank professional interest, the way she'd stare into a strongbox. The steam thinned. The woman's shoulders settled. She thanked us for the help, apologized for the trouble in that same tidy little cadence, and told us, as if it explained everything, that she was a magic automaton and had needed very badly to vent. She sat at the counter once the panel had clicked shut, hands folded, and introduced herself properly. Olivia. A maid-type wind-up doll, she said. And she said maid-type the way you'd give a rank. Vivian couldn't help herself. I've never seen a magic doll so human-like, she breathed. And the moment it was out, Olivia's face did nothing at all, and somehow that nothing looked like being hurt. I caught it before it landed. She's a fine lady, top to bottom, I told Vivian. Her chassis just vents when it runs hot. Mine does too, most Fridays. It was a bad joke. Olivia turned it over like it was a real gift and seemed to file it away. Stella reached out and poked the back of Olivia's left hand. It clattered open along a seam, mechanical, and folded shut again. For half a second, Stella's blank face flickered, genuine surprise, rare as a comet. I noted, not for the first time, that Stella's silence and this doll's silence were 2 different countries. Then I asked what any of us were thinking. What did she remember? 2 things, Olivia said. She remembered a mission, to find a master to serve, and she remembered that she had been exiled. Everything before that was gone, force scrubbed, a slate wiped down to bare stone, exiled. Of course, everyone who found this corner arrived carrying that same word. She stood and she bowed, and she declared that in thanks for saving her life, she would serve the 3 of us and obey any command we gave. I tried to hand her off to Vivian's place. Vivian refused on the spot. The diner could use the extra hands, and I like her. And Olivia looked at me and waited, patient as furniture, to be told what she was allowed to do. I have a rule about not feeding everyone. I have never once managed to keep it. Olivia in the diner's white and pink maid apron was a quick study at everything except people. A regular named Green came in that week, a broad, earnest fellow who liked to order the boldest thing on the board and pretend it didn't frighten him. This morning, it was the spicy pepper bean sprout steak stir-fry, announced like a duel. Olivia glided over to take it and stopped perhaps a hand's width from his nose. "How may I take your order?" she asked, close enough to fog his collar. Green went the color of the pepper. I hauled her back by the apron strings and taught her, for the 5th time, that in this country, people liked a little distance with their lunch. She absorbed the correction, adjusted her spacing to the exact measured inch, and never quite understood why. Between the breakfast and lunch runs, I sent her out on errands, and I gave her one rule and made her repeat it back. If a stranger tries to make you hurt someone, you don't. You do not obey bad people. She said she understood. Vivian watched her go and asked, dry over a spoon of fried rice, whether this was really the direction our shop was heading. I told her it was a little late to ask. An old man with a bad knee stopped me later to say the girl who'd carried his luggage looked exactly like someone he'd known once. 40 years back, he thought, though he couldn't place where. I laughed it off. I shouldn't have. My bad feelings always come due. She was late coming back, and my bad feeling stood up and put its coat on. I found the alley by the sound. A knot of men, outsiders, not our town's kind, the sort the old Night Vale grip used to keep swept out before it fell apart, had lured Olivia in with some story about needing help. Now they had her cornered for sport. There was a starving stray backed against the wall, all ribs and terror, and a vendor's cart of fruit, and the men were laughing and ordering her to wreck both. Menace the dog. Smash the cart. You can do it, can't you, doll? And don't you dare tell that diner owner. Olivia stood between them and the stray and would not move. She was begging them to stop. She put herself over the trembling animal and said she would take the blows in its place. And the thing that turned my stomach was that she meant it as a solution. The only kind of know her makers had left her. I picked 2 cleavers off the nearest wall. Alchemy's good for that, and walked in. It didn't take long. When it was over, the stray was untouched. The cart still stood, and the men who could still run were running. I crouched by Olivia. She was shaking, which she should not have been able to do. You don't have to listen to bad people, I told her. The bad ones are the ones who'd make you or someone you love sad. When they come, you're allowed to fight back. Something in her lit up at that word. Allowed. She rose and she reached back over both shoulders, and 2 heavy magic cannons unlatched and swung up into firing position, aimed at the last groaning thug. I got both hands on them and pushed them down fast. That is an extermination weapon, I hissed. That is for a war. Put them away. She stowed them, blinking, filing this too, that being allowed to say no was not the same as being allowed to erase a street. Close enough for one afternoon. I thought that was the strangest thing that would walk up to my door that season. I was wrong by a wide margin. Stella came in one noon and asked, flat as ever, if she could keep a dog. I asked the sensible questions. She said she'd already picked it up. It was outside, sitting in the middle of my street with its shadow big enough to block the sun, was a wolf the height of 2 men. Biscuit, Stella announced. Cute. Vivian made a sound only mages make. That's a divine wolf, a phantom beast species. They almost never come down into the human world. Stella, you picked up something incredibly rare. I pointed out, reasonably, that a phantom beast twice the height of a grown man is not a dog. Stella considered this with great seriousness and countered that it was almost a dog. I looked at the wolf. The wolf looked at me with eyes older than the town, and I swear to you it looked faintly embarrassed on both our behalfs. We built it a rain shelter at the corner of the lot and called it the guard dog, and Stella walked it twice a day, before lunch and before dinner, and that was that. What on earth I was supposed to do with it, I never did work out. Biscuit turned out to be the easiest new mouth I'd ever fed, which is a strange thing to say about something that could have eaten the diner. He sat guard, and he spoke into your head instead of out loud, dry and ancient. And mostly, he just watched Stella like she was a fire he was warming carefully at. He didn't like Olivia. The one evening she brought him his dinner, he went stiff all over, and he told me later, cool in my skull, that he knew her sort of machine from somewhere long buried and did not care to remember it. I let it lie. Everyone here had a door they kept shut. At night, once, over a little wine, I asked who he used to belong to. He was quiet a while. Then he told me about a girl, and it was Stella who'd made him want to try living beside people one last time. On the walks, an old blacksmith's wife started calling Stella a big sister, and Stella liked that more than she let on. Stella is a big sister, she informed the wolf, solemn. I'll protect you. Him, the thing that could level a hill. She meant it with her whole small chest, and Biscuit lowered his enormous head so she could reach it. He gave me the rest of it in pieces. Over those weeks, the way he gave everything. There'd been a beast tamer once, a silver-haired girl named Monica, young and reckless and kind, who'd walked straight into the deepest part of the forest where his pack lived and coaxed him out into the human world with nothing but patience. The pack elder, white-furred and old as roots, warned him what humans were and told him plainly that if he left with her, he could never come home. He left with her anyway. They had years, Real ones, good ones, until they didn't. Monica died the way brave people die, too soon, and the last thing she did was apologize to him for it. She was sorry she couldn't stay with him to the very end, so he was in exile twice over, cast out by his own kind for loving a human, and left behind by the human he'd loved. And then a small silver-haired girl in a pink apron had walked up to him in a street and named him Biscuit, and he had let himself, against 1,000 years of better sense, hope one more time. I didn't see the two men at the cafe across the way. I only pieced them together afterward. One wore tinted glasses and dressed in black and did the talking. His partner did the doubting. They watched Stella walk her impossible dog past the window, and they saw money. A real divine wolf, that rare, would fetch a fortune at any black market auction, but the man in the glasses had a better buyer in mind. He named a collector, a lord out in the Lost Child domain, Ambrose Lostchild, who paid like a king for rare living things, and, by both their accounts, was a genuine madman you could never read. The partner didn't like it. A lunatic, he said. Unpredictable. Nothing like the old bosses. The man in the glasses waved that off. The Night Vale Company was gone, he said. The whole underworld was up for grabs, and a divine wolf laid at a mad collector's feet was exactly the gift that would pull two nobodies up into his good graces. They watched a while longer. Then they went to make their arrangements, and over the whole warm, ordinary town, none of us heard a thing. They took him at lunch. Stella and Biscuit were in their meadow, sharing the quiet the way they did, when more than 10 men came out of the tree line at once. A man in dark silver led them, smooth and certain, telling Biscuit they only wanted him to come along, that they knew he could kill them all, and that it wouldn't matter because they held the advantage here. Then they raised the rods. Phantom seal rods. Vivian named them for me later. Cruel little things shaped like interlocked fingers, forged to suppress a phantom beast, crackling all over with purple lightning that drank the strength right out of him. One rod would have flattened an ordinary monster. They drove 3 into Biscuit before he stopped being able to stand, and even then it took every man they had to wrap him in chain and rope. They hitched him behind a caravan of horse carriages and dragged him toward the town gate, 3 rods buried in him, his great body plowing a furrow through the road. And Stella screamed his name once, and then she ran, not after them on foot, which was hopeless, but sideways to the nearest tied horse. She stole a horse. A girl who 3 seasons ago couldn't lift her own eyes stole a horse and rode it flat out down the North Road alone after 10 armed men because she had decided she was somebody's big sister and a big sister protects. An archer loosed at her. She didn't slow. When she drew even with the dragging chains, she didn't rein in or think it through. She threw herself off the running horse straight at the wolf. She missed her grip. She hit the road hard and rolled, and it must have torn her up badly, and I wasn't there, and I will hear that part of it in my chest for a long time. But her hand had closed on something as she went down, one of the 3 rods, and she wrenched it free. 2 rods could not hold what 3 had barely managed. Biscuit felt the drain break, and 1,000 years of leashed strength came off the chain at once. He stood. The links that bound him snapped like dry reeds. He was among the kidnappers before their leader finished shouting. I'm told the man got out one panicked word about the shop manager being level 100 before the whole brave band forgot their fortune and fled with whatever they could still run on. He didn't chase them. He turned and he lowered himself to the girl bleeding in the dust, and he took her up gentle as a held breath, and he carried her home. I was already at the door when the shadow came up the road with Stella on his back. I took her down from him careful. She was breathing, scraped raw and out cold and alive. The most important word there is. I held her and I looked up at the wolf, and I already knew. Are you sure about this? Was all I managed. He was sure. He told me, quiet and even in the middle of my head, that today would happen again and again as long as he stayed. That the men who wanted him would keep coming, and each time they came, they would come through her. He thanked me. He asked me to carry his thanks to everyone in the town who'd been kind to a stray that wasn't a dog. For one breath, I wasn't in my own head at all. I was in his. 1,000 years of it. The pack that cast him out. The girl who died apologizing. And this last small hope in a pink apron that he was about to give up to keep it breathing. An exile twice. Choosing exile a 3rd time. Because the only way he knew to love a thing was to take the danger away from it and carry it off alone. Then it snapped shut, and I was just a cook holding a hurt girl at his own door. He said he was an exile, cast out by his own kind, and unable to live among people either, and that it was because we could say goodbye that we truly met at all. Then he turned and went, and the dusk took him. Stella woke that night and asked for him. I told her the truth, that he'd gone off to hide from the men who hunt his kind, and that hiding was how he was keeping her safe. She asked if she'd see him again. I told her we'd live well and eat right in the meantime. Start with a mountain of vegetables, maybe, because that was the only promise I could keep with my hands. Somewhere far out past the gate, out where the road gives up and the dark starts, a wolf lifted its head and howled once, long and low, so we would know he was still out there watching. We had something warm to lose again, and out east, a name I'd half heard and wholly forgotten was already turning our whole small family over in its hands, deciding what it wanted. I was scraping cold grease off the griddle when the morning went strange on me, and I couldn't have told you why. Somewhere I couldn't see, in a cold place far to the east, a voice was making a promise. I only learned it later, in pieces, that it had served and served well, longer than any oath should ask, that whatever it stood accused of, it had never done. And that betrayal after that much loyalty was the cruelest thing one person could do to another. So it would find the one who did it, even if the finding took 1,000 years, and settle the account. The kind of promise you don't forget you made. But I knew none of that. What actually happened that morning was Vivian, waving a folded pamphlet at me like a summons. "This world runs on credentials, Dennis," she said, planting both hands on the counter. "You can be the best cook alive, and they'll still ask where you studied." I told her I never once set foot in a school, and I'd turned out fine. That's exactly the problem. She slid the pamphlet across the counter. A magic academy in the capital, holding a trial day for anyone thinking of enrolling. She was thinking of enrolling. Stella sat in the corner booth with a bowl going cold in front of her, chin on her hand, eyes on the door like a dog might walk back through it. She hadn't touched much of anything since Biscuit left, and I hadn't found the words to fix it, because there weren't any. Olivia set a glass of water at my elbow and announced, in that flat, clear way of hers, that she would escort Vivian to the school as her guard, and was prepared to deploy if there was trouble. "It's a commute, not a campaign," I told her. "Put the cannons away and wipe down table 4. She stowed the shoulder cannons she'd already half raised and went to wipe table 4. Vivian looked at me. I looked at the pamphlet. I told myself a man my age had no business at a school, and then heard my own mouth say we'd go for the day. The place was called the Clockwork Academy, after a legendary mage, Julius, the Clockwork King, one of the old Silver Wings who'd put down some great threat before either of us was born. He'd written the laws that governed metals and ores, and built machines that walked. Trial day meant stalls, and stalls meant Vivian in heaven. She bought the whole run of a novel series about the Clockwork King, 2 copies of each. I found a stall selling a restaurant manual I already owned and bought 4 more copies, which I will not be explaining. We drifted past a lecture hall with its doors propped open, and I glanced in. Down at the front, chalk in hand, working a room full of students, was a small freckled woman I knew, Rachel. She used to wait tables for me. Now she was up there teaching magic history, like she'd been born to it. We caught her at lunch. She hugged us both, thrilled, going a mile a minute about the old faces. But I've spent years reading people across a counter, and something in her cheer sat wrong, like a smile held on with pins. She was a part-time lecturer, she said, still climbing toward a proper post, still publishing to earn it. Henrietta was off in the night order, struggling through her training. The cafeteria food was, professionally speaking, an insult. Dry fried rice the students ate with dead eyes. Then a tall, pale man in a black suit drifted past our table, an associate professor, Cutter. He greeted Rachel warmly enough and mentioned the battle magic lecture they shared the next period, said he was looking forward to it. The temperature at our table dropped 10 degrees. Rachel laughed, and the laugh had that pinned-on quality, and her hand tightened around her cup. The second Cutter was gone, she leaned in and begged us not to come to her class. "Too embarrassing," she said. "Please, just skip it." I said sure. I had no intention of skipping it. We hid at the back. Vivian told me twice we shouldn't. We did anyway. Cutter ran the lecture like a man in love with his own voice, Rachel at his side as his assistant. The material was good, I'll admit. For the first time, I heard the plain rules, under the magic I'd always done by feel. Then, he asked Rachel to demonstrate a defense. He'd throw an attack. She'd counter it. Simple classroom stuff, except he threw it at full strength, way past what any demonstration called for. She got her counter up, and it wasn't enough. The spell punched through and threw her into the wall. She caught it on her shoulder and elbow, the only reason it wasn't worse. And he smiled that pinned corpse smile and made a show of concern, wondering aloud whether he'd struck a touch too hard, then turned it into a lesson about the trouble with teachers hired on connections instead of merit. The room went quiet the way a room goes quiet when everyone's decided not to be next. Students whispered that this was just Cutter, famous for it. The new ones always got it worst. Rachel picked herself up off the floor and apologized, said she'd train harder. That was the part I couldn't sit through. I stood up. I asked, loud enough to carry, whether all the teachers at this fine academy were washed-up frauds who couldn't control their own output. Cutter's smile fell off his face like a dropped plate, and he challenged me to a duel in the square, right there, in front of everyone. I told him I accepted. I even offered to let the students come watch. Call it a practical, I said. Defense against fraudulent magicians. Word travels fast at a school. By the time we reached the square, a wall of students ringed it, and Cutter was already there, wand out, dressing it up as a teaching exercise. He told me not to complain if I died. I told him a spell that Messi earned 0 points from any restaurant owner worth his salt. He opened with a storm of ice spears, a whole sky of them, dropping like rain. I raised the serving curtain, my skill, the one that hangs a shop curtain in the air that nothing physical gets through. The spears stopped against it like they'd struck a wall, and I stood behind cloth thin as a napkin and didn't feel a thing. Behind me, Vivian was explaining to Rachel, at volume, what I'd just done, and I heard the words level 100 and winced. Cutter's face did something ugly. He summoned golems, 4 of them, big stone brutes lumbering out of nothing, and sent them at me all at once. I used forced eviction strike. It grabs where a thing is and puts it somewhere it isn't, hard, and I drove all 4 straight down into the flagstones. The square shook. When the dust cleared, 4 stone arms stuck up out of the ground like the world's ugliest fence posts. Cutter panicked and reached for the big one, an explosion spell, the kind meant to end things. I alchemized an iron pot out of the air, flung it into the blast, and let it eat the fire. Then I walked through the smoke, close enough to smell the fear on him. I used flavor break. It makes seasoning out of nothing. I made a fistful of pepper and threw it in his eyes. He screamed and clawed at his face, blind, and I put him on the ground with 1 clean shot to the jaw. No skill in it, just a cook's arm and a lifetime of hauling stock pots. The square went dead silent, then came apart, students pressing in, all wanting to know who I was. So I told them the truth and made it small. I said I was just a friend of Rachel's, and that whatever they'd seen, they had her to thank, because she was the one worth defending. I watched the whole roaring crowd turn its shine off me and onto her, where it belonged, and she stood there gone completely pink, and I figured that was worth the trip on its own. That should have been the end of my day. It was not. A voice cut through the crowd calling my name, delighted, and then Katie had me in a hug before I could get my arms up. School guards trailed her. She wore a captain's bearing, easy. Cheerful as a bell, she told me the Silver Wing Battalion ran security for the academy now, under contract. My old party turned into a security firm. Then, her eyes lit up in a way I've learned to fear, and she asked, since the school kitchen was right there, whether I'd cook hamburgers for the whole school. She had a hamburger stomach now, she informed me. She had the principal's blessing inside of 5 minutes. She's like that. I cooked for every student in that building. My arms were done by the 3rd batch, and I kept going till past dark. And the next morning, I lay across my own counter like something washed up while Vivian and Stella leafed through papers about which school to visit next. I told them I was never going on one of these trips again. Nobody at that table believed me. I'm not sure I did either. Here's a room I wasn't in. I pieced it together after. Cutter went crawling to a man named Lostchild, Lord Ambrose Lostchild, a great noble who held the strings of the kingdom's money, and a collector, the kind who gathers rare and beautiful things and doesn't much distinguish between the living and the dead. He was sitting with a 2-headed dog on a leash when Cutter came in, nursing broken ribs, humiliated, stripped of his post after the school petitioned to hand it to Rachel. He'd come for revenge. He wanted the collector to ruin me. Lostchild asked him instead about a rare book, the Clockwork Manuscript, the last work of Julius the Clockwork King, thought burned but being rebuilt from its ashes. Cutter answered. And then, mild and bored, Lostchild remarked that a 2-headed dog was rarer than a 3-headed one because they'd been hunted nearly to nothing, and that mediocrity was a slow poison he couldn't keep in the room. He asked Cutter to perform one last service. Then he had him removed. Cutter was taken out of that room and no one ever saw him again. That's all I'll say, because that's all anyone would ever say. Lostchild told his man Holt, a pale servant in black with nothing behind his voice, to have the room cleaned and to put an agent onto me. He wanted everything about the cook who'd turned up at the wolf capture, at the fall of House Ashcroft's trader, at every strange thing lately. He wanted the manuscript, and he'd decided I was worth studying. Holt gave the agent a name, Candy. I met her the way you meet weather. Olivia and I had just fetched her maid uniform back from the tailor's, and she was so pleased she changed into it right there in the shop, announcing that it was very beautiful, very happy. We were walking back when we came on a quarrel. A big adventurer type squared up over a small woman in a tweed hat, going on about her attitude. I stepped in the way I always do, which is with food. I told the big man he'd been a little out of line himself, but if he came by the diner, I'd stand him a shrimp fried rice with extra shrimp. That took the fight clean out of him. He promised to come eat and lumbered off happy. The small woman thanked me. By name, she called me Mr. Dennis, soft and drawn out, like she'd been saying it a while in private. I hadn't told her my name. I noticed it the way you notice a draft. A half second of wrong, then gone. Olivia remarked that an awful lot of people seemed to know me, and I said it was nothing, and we went home. Behind us, the woman in the tweed hat watched me go. Her name was Candy, and later I'd learn what ran through her head as she stood there, that I was exactly her type, and that the detective work could start right now. I didn't hear a word of it. I was thinking about shrimp. Stella was still low. She pushed her rice around and said, quiet, that maybe Biscuit had died out there. I told her to knock it off with the moping. Vivian jumped in gentler than me. Phantom beasts aren't really flesh the way we are. They don't just die of ordinary hurts. So wherever he'd gone, he was almost certainly fine. Olivia offered her own comfort, that even a once-in-a-lifetime meeting need not be a goodbye forever, that travelers on a wide road can always cross again someday. It helped a little. Stella ate 2 more bites. That was when Candy walked into my diner. She introduced herself, meek and sweet, ordered the daily special, and set a book on the table that stopped me cold. The Ex-Adventurer's Restaurant Manual, the same edition I owned, the one I'd never met another living soul reading. I lit right up. We talked shop. I offered to lend her my copy, and I thought, what a nice young woman. Across the room, Vivian narrowed her eyes and muttered that something about her felt off. Beside her, the twin-tailed mage folded her arms and grumbled that this stranger was awfully forward for a first visit, then admitted, sourly, that she'd been dropping hints at me for months, and I'd never caught a one. I noticed none of it. That night, in a shabby rented room across town, Candy laid out everything she'd gathered on me like a hand of cards. I wasn't there. I only know because of what came after. She'd been thorough. The diner, the friends, the wolf, the whole shape of my days. And somewhere in the pile, she'd turned up a resemblance that stopped her. A dangerous man in the royal guard they called the general. A man named Heath, whose face looked enough like mine that she wrote down a guess that he might be a brother I'd lost back at the start, before I could remember. She set that aside for later. What she circled instead was Stella. Stella owned a rare book Lost Child would pay well for. Stella was the bright thing at the center of my little family. And Candy, sipping her tea, decided the neat solution was to get her out of the way. Take the book, clear the obstacle, and be there to comfort a heartbroken cook afterward. She worked it out like a sum and laughed, how it served her master and her heart in one stroke. I was asleep 3 streets over, with no idea a door had opened in the dark, and something had walked through it, looking at the girl I'd carried home from an auction block. The man who'd hired Candy knew exactly what she was. I found that out later too. The night order had cast her out for the way she'd fixate on a person, then remove everyone around them until no one was left to compete. There were deaths in that story. No one wrote them down, and I won't either. She spent the next days learning Stella's route through town. Stella took a shortcut, a back alley, quiet, walls too high to be seen over, Candy's opening. But someone had been watching the watcher. Olivia came down off a rooftop like a dropped anvil, her shoulder cannons already swung out and open, and put herself between Candy and Stella before Candy's hand ever got close. Stella froze against the wall behind her, wide-eyed, and stayed. Candy tried the sweet act first, an old friend, just passing. Olivia asked her flat out what she wanted, and Candy, maybe because Olivia wasn't quite a person to her, told the truth. She wanted the girl gone, so she could have me all to herself. The ones you love, she said, you take. You clear away everything in the way, and you keep them. Olivia answered her in that plain mechanical voice, and I've thought about what she said a lot since. I do not think so, she said. The ones you love are not to be seized or hoarded. They are to be served and stayed beside. Then Candy said something back, and it found a seam none of us knew Olivia had. What would Olivia do if the one she cared about didn't need her? If she were cast off, unwanted, and Olivia stopped? Somewhere behind those glassy eyes, an old thing surfaced. A voice from before her memory was scoured out, telling her she was no longer needed, that this was goodbye, that she was exiled. She locked up cold in the middle of the alley. Candy took the opening. She's small and light, but she has a skill that pours all her weight into a single point of contact, and she drove it into Olivia's chest, then snapped a kick into her neck, blows that would have finished anyone made of flesh. But Olivia isn't flesh. And under the frozen memory, something older held. "I am not a thing that is no longer needed," she said, and came back to herself all at once, and got 2 hands on Candy and threw her the length of the alley. Candy hit the wall, rolled up unhurt, and read the math in a heartbeat that she couldn't crack this one, not today. She used a vanishing trick and was simply gone between one shadow and the next. Olivia stood over Stella in the empty alley, cannons still smoking, and Stella hadn't taken so much as a scratch. Olivia brought Stella home in one piece and told me, plain and flat, most of what had happened. Not all of it, not the voice that had frozen her, which she couldn't seem to hold on to and I didn't push, but enough. I stood in my own doorway with the lamp behind me and felt the shape of it settle in my chest. Somebody with money and reach and patience had reached past the wolf, past the hunters, past all of it, and put a hand on the one thing in this town I'd walk into fire for. She'd missed only because a wind-up maid I'd taken in on a whim had chosen, without being told to stand in the way. She'd run, but she wasn't finished. I understood that even then. She'd be back, better prepared, and next time I wouldn't get the luck of a rooftop and hidden cannons. I looked at Stella, safe and shaken at the counter, and at Olivia, dented and steady beside her. And out east, that name I'd half heard and never chased down had a face now, and a method, and it was turning my whole small family over in its hands, deciding what it wanted to keep and what it wanted to break. I closed the shutters myself that night. I'd stopped telling myself a man can't protect everyone. It had never once been true for me anyway. I sealed the letter before the griddle was even hot. 4 things I wanted dug up, and I wrote each one in plain words so nobody could pretend they'd misread me. The stalker in the checkered cap, who'd walked into my diner smiling and reached for my girl in an alley. The ring that trafficked rare beasts. The professor who'd come sniffing and then simply stopped existing. And the last line, the one I sat over longest, where Olivia had come from and who had built her. Olivia herself was propped on a stool in the corner, her neck held straight in a brace, insisting she was perfectly fine, while a bolt in her collar clicked every time she tried to nod. She'd taken a blow in that alley that would have finished anyone made of blood. She wasn't made of blood. She was dented and cheerful and wrong about being fine, and I'd stopped arguing. Stella sat near her, folding a paper wolf and not looking at it. She was still grieving the real one. I didn't have a fix for that in the pantry, so I did the only thing I know how to do for grief, which is keep somebody fed. Vivian came in mid-morning with a book already open and asked after Olivia the way she asks after everything, gently and a beat too loud. "Her neck's wrecked," I said. "She's in a brace for a while. She'll outlast the both of us." I handed the letter to the courier and watched it go east, toward the capital and toward Rachel, who'd know how to pull threads I couldn't reach. Word came back within days. She'd hand the stalker to Katie, hand the beast ring to an honest judge named Sebastian, and keep the strange doll for herself. That last one, she wrote, she wanted to hold in her own 2 hands. I told myself I'd only asked so I could sleep. That was a lie, and I knew it while I was telling it. I wasn't there for the next part. I pieced it together later from Henrietta, and I'm telling it the way she told me because I've never quite been able to shake it. She'd made night, after everything, the party that used her, the dungeon where a masked man with 2 cleavers had pulled her out of a robbery. She'd finished her training and stood in the sun in a new steel plate and been named a knight of the capital's mobile corps. She said it was the proudest morning of her life. Then she saw a man in black across the yard. Black formal wear, gold thread at the collar, dark hair, the right height, the right build, standing the way I stand when I'm reading a room. Her whole chest went warm. She thought it was me, come all that way to see her graduate. She ran at his back to throw her arms around him. Steel stopped her an inch from the throat. A short, silver-haired woman in a white uniform had a blade out before Henrietta had finished the last stride. No warning, no wind-up, just a line of metal at her neck and cold eyes asking whether she had business here. The man in black turned around, and he had my face. Not exactly. Henrietta could never say exactly, only that it was like looking at me through cold water. He waved the attendant off, easy as calling a dog to heel, told her a girl with no hostility wasn't worth drawing on. "Florence," he called her. The blade went away. He smiled at Henrietta. He said he wasn't the man she'd taken him for, laughed the mistake off, and told her, lightly, like a senior doing her a favor, to be careful of the older knights. Then he walked on, and Henrietta stood there with her proud morning gone strange in her mouth, thinking one thing over and over. That man is Dennis, but he isn't Dennis. The trouble found her in a corridor, the way trouble does. a red-haired cadet named Ashton Enderby planted himself in front of her and her commoner comrades and started in on their blood. Paraphrasing him is kind, so I'll paraphrase. He told them that no matter how hard the lowborn scrubbed, their futures were nothing beside a real officer's, and that the day he got his commission, Henrietta would be the first career he broke. Her friends grabbed her sleeves to hold her back. She shook them off and told him straight that she didn't care about lineage or promotion, that she was a knight, and knights protect what needs protecting, and she happened to know a man greater than any noble he'd ever bow to. That was when the man in black came back. Heath stepped into it without hurry, put himself between the cadet and the girl, and asked Ashton, mild as weather, for his full name. The boy wouldn't give it, sniffed that a man ought to know him on sight. So Heath decided out loud that he must be from some house too small to bother with. That cracked Ashton wide open. He shouted that he was an Enderby, that his father was a count, that a word from home could have Heath transferred by nightfall. Heath found that funny. He told the boy that a count sat a very long way beneath him and left it there, still smiling, waiting to see what the child would do with that. Henrietta never saw the technique. Nobody did. There was Heath's easy voice, and then there was Ashton on his knees. By the time anyone understood what had happened, the boy's sword arm hung at his side like a sleeve with nothing in it. No cut, no blood, no blade drawn, no hand raised that she could name. The arm simply wasn't his anymore. It didn't answer him, didn't lift, didn't so much as twitch when he screamed at it to. Heath asked him, pleasant and curious, whether the arm seemed to be working, as if he'd only just noticed. The silver-haired attendant sighed and murmured that he might at least have chosen the other one. Instructors came running. Heath ignored the whole panic of it, turned to the nearest officer, and asked, calmly, like a man ordering off a menu, to see the list of new candidates. They led him away without a word of argument. Henrietta said even the education director had gone pale when Heath's name came up that morning. Her instructor caught her arm on the way out and told her, low, to keep her distance from that man. Not because of rank, because of what he was. She promised she would, but she stood in the emptying corridor a long time, turning it over. The same warmth she felt standing next to me, and under it something with no bottom to it. A man wearing my face on the wrong side of a very cold door. She didn't have a word for it, neither did I, when she told me. I still don't. Back home, Olivia declared herself healed by taking the brace off without asking anyone. She stood, rolled her neck till it clicked into place, and announced that she was not so flimsy a maid that a broken neck could keep her from her duties, then tried to wash the whole stack of dishes at once and picked up the cooking oil instead of the soap. I took the oil back. She really was mended. Tough thing. The bell rang and a tall woman came in out of the road. Pointed hat, green coat, a heavy brown leather bag, curly blue hair, and dark rings under her eyes, like she hadn't slept in a season. She ordered the daily steak stir-fry and sat quiet in the corner. Vivian nearly dropped her book. She was up at the woman's table in a breath, half whispering that she couldn't be. She was Enid Morrow, wasn't she, who wrote the Clockwork King novels. The woman flinched at her own name, like it was a hand raised at her. Then, reluctant, she admitted it, and signed the page Vivian shoved at her, and asked us both not to display the autograph and not to tell anyone she was here. Vivian pressed, was there a new book? Enid dug in the bag and came out with a manuscript, handed it over, and said it was one she no longer needed. Vivian left so fast she forgot to pay. I brought the author her tea. She wrapped both hands around it and said she'd come to the countryside for the quiet to write. I said the town was good for quiet. I didn't say the rest, that people who come this far, this careful, usually come running from something, and that I run a whole diner full of them. I just refilled the cup and let her be. For a few days, Vivian was the happiest I'd seen her. She'd read the new manuscript, a dark monster hunting story, some lone hunter clearing a nest of goblins out of a ruined valley, and loved it. And Enid had handed her a second, rougher draft to judge and called her an editor. Vivian took that word like a knighthood. Then she made the mistake honest people make. When Enid asked what she thought of the weak one, Vivian told her the truth. Slow in the middle, she said. The hero's not strong enough. The ending falls flat. By Vivian's own account, Enid came out of her chair like a struck cat, shouting that Vivian had called her work garbage, and Vivian was so rattled, she knocked a teacup off the table, and it went to pieces on the floor. They both apologized into the wreckage. Enid pivoted to a plan. Publish here, in town, small, away from the capital. Vivian agreed to help. That evening, she came into the diner low and quiet, turning it over. The twin-tail mage smelled a story and dug for it, and her ponytail friend joined the teasing. "Come on, what author? Tell us." Vivian let the goblin book slip. The twin-tail one went still. She'd seen a foreign book like that, she said, a translated one, and the name attached to it. She looked at Vivian and asked, careful, if she meant Enid Morrow, the one the capital banished for plagiarism, for stealing another writer's work whole and calling it hers. Vivian didn't have an answer. She sat there with her mouth open and the lamplight on her face, and I watched a good kid's whole warm week come apart in her hands like a dropped plate. Vivian went to Enid's Inn the next night. She told me all of it after, and I'm keeping it whole because it's the part that matters most, and I won't have it rushed. Vivian didn't circle it. She said she'd heard and asked if it was true. And Enid, cornered, exhausted, done hiding, said yes. She'd stolen. She'd taken a dead man's story and dressed it as her own and been thrown out of the only world she'd ever wanted. And now the words wouldn't come at all, and every blank page was proof she'd never had any of her own to begin with. Then Vivian said the wrong right thing. She said she believed Enid could write something real, her own. It broke something loose. Enid came at her, shoved her, hit her out of pure self-hatred, sobbing that she would never write again, that no one would ever read a single word of hers as long as she lived. Vivian got a scrape out of it and didn't so much as raise a hand. "I was careless with what I said before," Vivian told her, once the storm had worn itself out. "I'm sorry for that, but I still want to read whatever you write next. I mean it." Enid asked her why. Why bother? For a thief. "Because somebody almost let me get thrown away, once," Vivian said. "And somebody didn't. So I don't let people go." Enid wept then, properly, all the way down. And when it was over, she was quiet in a new way. Not the guarded quiet she'd walked in with, but something cleaner. She said maybe there was one book left in her, not stolen, true, and original, and hers. And she'd take it back to the capital and write it, if there was one reader in the world waiting for it. Vivian told her there was. Her first waiting reader, Enid called it. Neither of them knew what they'd just lit. I didn't either, not then. A reformed thief's promise to write one honest book. It sounded like the smallest thing in the world. Keep hold of it. It isn't. Afterward, Vivian walked out to a meadow at the edge of town, to a small grave she keeps. Cynthia is buried there, the young mage she once failed to save and carried home to bury. Vivian sat with her a while and talked, the way you talk to someone who can't answer, asking whether it was arrogant to promise a person you'd believe in them, whether making promises like that just set people up to be let down. She didn't get a reply. She said she didn't need one. She'd made the promise already, and she'd decided she wasn't sorry. That was the whole of it, and she came back lighter than she'd left. Enid came in one last time before she left for the capital. She ordered the fried rice this time. Stella tugged her sleeve and told her flat that the fried rice was the good one, which is the highest praise Stella gives, and she ate like a person who'd remembered she was allowed to. Before she went, she told me her next book already had a reader waiting on it. She said it like it was a fortune. Maybe it was. I told her good luck out there and meant it. Then I put her out of my mind because I had a diner to run and a courier at the door with a letter from the capital. Rachel had kept her word. She'd been reading Enid's Clockwork King books against the old Academy papers, chasing the doll in the stories. The artificial person the legend says the Clockwork King built to think and feel like a living woman. Everyone treated that doll as fairy tale. Rachel had stopped being sure. Her letter ended on a line she'd underlined twice. What if it's real? If it is, she wrote, this changes everything. I read that at my own counter with Olivia 3 steps away, humming, drying a plate she'd already dried. I didn't put it together. That's the part that still turns my stomach. The answer was standing in my kitchen, and I read right past her. That night, I went up to check the shutters and heard Olivia's voice through Stella's half-open door, pitched low, meant for no one. Stella was asleep, one hand still curled around that paper wolf. Olivia was kneeling by the bed, and she was telling the sleeping girl that she was the big sister here, and that she would protect her, that she'd protect her, even if her body was shattered to pieces. And then she said a word I couldn't make sense of, soft, almost to herself, this time. Like there'd been a last time, like somewhere behind the scoured place where her memory should be, she'd already stood over someone she loved and failed, and been thrown away for it, and told herself never again. She doesn't remember it, her body does. I stepped back from the door and left her to it. Downstairs, I closed the shutters myself, same as every night now. Out east, there was a stalker withdrawn but not gone, a collector with my whole small family in his hands, deciding what to keep and what to break, and a man wearing my own face at the cold heart of the capital, asking after lists of names for reasons I couldn't guess. None of it had touched us yet. All of it was coming. And under my own roof, a broken writer had just promised to tell the truth for once, and a doll out of a legend was kneeling in the dark, swearing to a sleeping child that this time she wouldn't lose her. I didn't know yet that those were the two quietest and most dangerous things that had happened all year. I just checked the locks and went up to bed and listened to the house breathe. The first time Heather Pemberton walked into my kitchen, I split a cabbage in half without meaning anything by it, and I think that was the moment she decided to hate me. This was years back, at Black's restaurant, before any of the rest of it. Jine lined the whole staff up along the pass and told us to mind our manners because the capital's culinary school had sent us its top graduate. Then she nodded at the girl beside her to speak for herself. "Pleased to meet you all. I'm Heather Pemberton." She said it like a challenge, chin up, not a single crease in her uniform. She wanted to be head chef, and she wasn't bothering to hide it. The cooks around me started whispering before she'd finished, and they were whispering about me, not her, that the vice chef wasn't quite human, that I'd never sat a single day in any school. Heather caught it, and her eyes went hunting for whatever they meant. She asked Jean about me straight out. John gave her the truth, more or less, that I'd never been schooled, that she'd kept me clear of it on purpose, because I had a habit of being stronger than a kitchen has any use for. Then she walked the girl back to my station, right as I was breaking down a crate of cabbages. I brought the cleaver down once. The whole head fell open into ribbons, clean, like it had been waiting years to come apart. I grinned and wiped my hands on my apron. "Oh, you're the new one. I heard about you. Hellstrike, right? Pemberton," she said. I got her name wrong and didn't even notice. She noticed. She stood there looking at the shredded cabbage and the man who'd done it, and whatever she'd walked in wanting, she walked out wanting to beat me instead. Years later, in a town a long way from the capital, I stood behind my own counter and counted empty chairs. The diner had been full for months. Then, over a couple of weeks, it wasn't. Stella leaned on the counter beside me, chin in her hands, watching the door not open. "Maybe everyone has awakened to home cooking," Olivia offered, wiping a clean table cleaner. She says things like that with total confidence, the way only she can. Stella had a better idea. Boxed lunches. Sell them right off the front step. Catch the people who didn't have time to sit down. She volunteered to run the tray herself. Olivia's hand shot straight up. She wanted the job too. I told her no before I'd even finished thinking about it. The streets hadn't been safe for her lately, though I didn't say that part out loud, and she grumbled that nobody ever trusts her with anything. That was when Vivian came through the door half sideways, out of breath, both arms full of the news like she couldn't carry it fast enough. "There's a new place," she gasped. "It just opened, and everyone is eating there." I asked her how she happened to know that. She opened her mouth, shut it, and went a shade of pink. Turned out everyone had included her for about 4 days running. She'd been sampling the competition and calling it research. We went to see it. I didn't have to ask which building. The line ran down the block and around the corner. The place was all fresh paint and gold lettering, the kind of front that costs more than most kitchens earn in a year. A board out front made the pitch in tall letters, cheaper than the Exile's diner and better. Vivian read it aloud and then looked at me like she was apologizing for the sign in person. I wasn't angry. I was doing the math. Nobody undercuts a whole town's prices and eats the difference unless somebody else is paying them to. Cheaper and better is a thing you promise, not a thing you can afford. I filed that away and went inside. The inside matched the front. Chandeliers, white cloth, a hush like a bank. And the chef who came out to meet us was the last person I expected, older now, and every bit as pressed as the day she'd corrected me on her own name. Vice Chef Dennis. Heather stopped a few feet off, hands folded, like she'd practiced it in a mirror. "I'm here to face you head on." She told us the rest fast, the way you say a thing you've held on to too long. The outcast kitchen was hers. A noble had put up the money, enough to build all of this, and she'd opened it for one reason, to settle, once and for all, which of us was Jean's true best. Then, she sat us down and served me the answer she'd cooked instead of shouting it. It was a steak, a good one, better than good, cut from something rare, seared exactly right, and she charged 5 copper coins for it. That isn't a price. That's a wound you open on purpose. "Man," I said around the first bite, "this is really good." She smiled like she'd already won. She was going to surpass me, she told me, as a cook and as an owner both, and this plate was her proving it. I set my fork down. Is there really such a thing as winning or losing at this? It came out gentler than I meant it. You were always Jean's best. Everybody in that kitchen knew it. It was the wrong right thing to say. Her whole face went tight, and the story came out of her sideways, that she'd only been named successor after I left. that for years she'd felt like the second choice they'd settled for, a replacement, shaped to fill the door the real one had walked out of. I didn't have an answer. I'd never once thought of it that way, and that was exactly the problem. Vivian looked between the two of us and had the good sense to say nothing at all. I remembered a morning at Black's, years before that, the kitchen empty and cold before the fires were lit. I used to do handstand push-ups against the wall to wake myself up, and Heather had come in early on purpose to catch me at it and demand, one more time, the secret. There had to be a trick, she insisted. Some technique, some shortcut nobody had bothered to teach her. I gave her the only answer I had, upside down, counting under my breath, daily effort, doing the thing you love all the way down to the bottom of it. That was the whole secret, start to finish. It wasn't what she wanted. I could hear it in the quiet after. She'd come looking for a door with a key, and I'd handed her a long road and called it good news. Walking home, Vivian asked how far back the two of us went. I gave her the short version. Same kitchen, same teacher, me a few years ahead. You feel bad about it, she said. It wasn't a question. I did. For years, I'd told myself I'd left that kitchen clean, that I'd taken nothing with me on the way out. Turned out I'd taken the top spot with me and left a hole shaped like a man for somebody else to fall into. You can hurt a person just by being good at your work and then leaving the room and never once know you did it. That didn't make it hurt her any less. I found out later how her nights were going. After close, when the tables were stripped, one of her people brought her the ledger and the bad news folded inside it. They weren't covering costs, not even close. Every plate that walked out the door lost money, and the losses were stacking up faster than she could count them. Heather waved it all off. Her backer had deep pockets and a long patience, she told him. The money would hold until the diner folded, and the town was hers for good. She believed it because she needed to. A person who has bet everything on being right can't afford to check the arithmetic too closely. But alone, with the lamps turned down, she let herself wonder whether she could beat me at all. Then she put the thought away, the way you put away a knife you've cut yourself on, and swore she would win anyway. And while I was scrubbing my own pans and feeling sorry for a rival, a carriage was being loaded in the capital. I wouldn't understand any of this until much later. I am setting it down now the way it was set down for me. In a dressing room bigger than my whole diner, Lord Ambrose Lothschild chose a coat for a journey and lectured his manservant Holt on the difference between winners and losers. To hear him tell it, winning was only patience, the long game, played by men willing to wait for it. Losers were simply easy to lead. You let a desperate person climb a ladder too tall to climb back down, and then, at your leisure, you take the ladder away. He was talking about Heather. He had never once cared whether her restaurant lived or died. The room had another feature I'll set down plainly and not linger over. Along one wall stood cages, and in the cages were phantom beasts, rare, dangerous creatures, kept hungry and half mad in the dark on purpose, because a starved thing fights harder. That was the kind of man he was. He kept suffering the way other men keep wine, saving it for later. Then he pulled on his gloves and told Holt they were leaving for the town. There was a treasure waiting there, he said, a legendary thing worth more than any restaurant, more than any loan he could call in. He meant to collect it. When I finally heard that word, treasure, I assumed he meant gold, or some relic, or Stella's rare old book. I had it wrong. The prize he was coming for was standing in my diner in an apron, calling out, "Welcome to strangers." And I didn't know it yet. Here's the part Heather never planned for. The town came back, not all at once. One at a time, a little sheepish. The twin-tailed girl who'd been a regular since the beginning slid into her usual seat and admitted she'd gone and tried the fancy place. The food was wonderful, she said, but it was only food. The room was cold. She'd rather fill her belly somewhere she didn't have to sit up straight and mind her manners. An old man who runs a carriage down the market road came in behind her, cap crushed in both hands, and apologized for straying. Fine cooking over there, he admitted. Something missing all the same. He was just more at home with our set meal. I told every one of them the same thing, which was nothing worth repeating. Pull up a chair, the usual, coming right up. Across the room, Stella caught my eye and flashed a small peace sign, deadpan as a stone. Olivia sang out, "Welcome," at the door, loud enough to rattle the windows. You can plate a better steak than mine. Turns out you can't outcook a room where nobody's afraid to put their elbows on the table. Heather did the only thing pride lets a person do when they're losing. She doubled down. She cut her prices again, past any sense at all, and poured what money was left into shouting louder. Bigger signs, louder criers on the corners. Her own staff begged her to stop. stop. She didn't hear a word of it. She was too busy drowning to notice the water, and that was the night Lost Child came to collect. He arrived without warning and let himself be seated like he owned the chairs, which, in a way, he did. He looked around at all the near-empty luxury he had paid for, and he told her, mild as a man, remarking on the weather, that losses this deep this early were not normal, and that he was cutting her funding tonight. Then he named his terms. He wouldn't demand the whole loan back at once. He was far too patient for that. But the interest he would have, and he'd have it one way or another. Indenture, ruin, whatever it took to make her account come out square. He said it the way you'd read a man his receipt, and that was the worst of it. There was no heat in it at all. Heather had no answer. Everything she'd built was a ladder somebody had just kicked out from under her, exactly the way he'd promised Holt it would go. Except he had made one mistake. He threatened her in a room with the town still in it. They weren't even her customers. They were mine, a handful who'd wandered over out of plain curiosity that night. But they'd sat in her cold, beautiful room and eaten her honest cooking, and they knew a wolf the moment they heard one talk. One of them stood up, then another. They told the old man he couldn't do this. And then, before he could so much as answer, they started doing the thing he never saw coming. They offered to pay it, her debt, themselves, all of them together. A carpenter said he could put in a little. A woman with a market stall named a number out loud. They passed it around the room, ordinary people with not much to spare, adding up what each of them could give to buy a stranger out of a rich man's hands. A stranger who had opened a shop for the express purpose of running their favorite diner into the ground. None of that mattered to them. She cooked in their town. That alone made her theirs to keep. I have never once in my life seen Lost Child's kind of man wear the face he wore then. Genuinely thrown. Money was the only language he had ever needed, and a room full of people had just refused to speak it back to him. That was when a runner reached my diner, and I came through the door. Lost Child turned, and the whole polite mask slid off, and he told me the truth at last. The restaurant, the loan, the rival, every bit of it. None of it had ever been about Heather. He had built the entire trap to reach one man, the one he'd truly come all this way to find. Me. I looked at him a long moment. Then I told him the only thing worth saying. If you wanted to see me that badly, I said, you could have just come and eaten at my diner. Behind me, Heather broke. She'd held the proud face through all of it. The losses, the threat, the whole cold room. And it was kindness that finally undid her, not cruelty. She sat down hard among strangers, offering up their grocery money. And she cried like something had come loose in her chest. And out of the crying came the truth she'd been swallowing for years. All she had ever wanted, she got out between the tears, was to be strong the way she'd always thought I was strong. Her pride had been wrong. The whole contest had been wrong. She didn't want to beat me, and she didn't want the capital, and she didn't want any of this. She just wanted to keep cooking, here, in this town, with these people, for as long as they'd have her. And over her bent head, the old man watched me, patient as ever, and I understood that whatever came next was already on its way to my door. He was still combing his hair when I came through the door. A little red comb dragged slow through those curls, like a man with nowhere he needed to be. Behind him stood the tall, pale one, Holt, hands loose at his sides, saying nothing. The kind of nothing that takes up a whole room. Lost Child didn't waste breath on threats first. He laid the dead out like a menu. Heather's loan, the one that had built this glittering place around us, was being called in, he said. Business reasons. The way you'd explain why the soup was off today. The number he named was the kind that doesn't get paid back in a lifetime of stakes. I stepped between him and Heather before I'd decided to. She's my junior, I said. Whatever she owes, I'll cover it. I've got colleagues in the capital. I know a count who still owes me a favor or two. That amused him. He let the comb rest and made his real offer. Smooth as poured cream. Cancel the debt, all of it. Pay more on top. All I had to do was lend him my waitress, the automaton, just for a little while. So there it was, the legendary treasure worth more than any restaurant. It had a name, and it wore a pink apron, and it called me boss. Rejected. The word came out flat, and I let it sit there. I won't hand one of my people over as collateral for a debt. Not for a little while, not for an afternoon. He started in about property, about value, about how a machine can't be robbed of anything it never had. I could hear the shape of it coming. She has a will of her own, I said. She decides who she serves. That makes her an employee, not a thing on a shelf. And I don't sell my people. My voice did something I hadn't planned. I spent a lot of years being the thing somebody kept because I was useful. The day they decided I wasn't, they threw me out in the road. I built this whole life, so nobody under my roof ever wears that collar again. You want to buy that off me for coin? There isn't enough coin in your whole house. The room had gone quiet. Even Heather had stopped crying to look at me. Lost Child's patience thinned. He told me, pleasant as ever, what he could do to a town this small, how little it would cost him to turn it into a barren field, how many things he kept in cages that were hungrier than they looked. I didn't answer that with words. I called a cleaver up out of the floorboards, alchemy, fast, a blade where a nail had been, and I put everything I had behind one swing at his neck. Holt caught it on his bare fist, not a block with a weapon, a hand. The shock that should have knocked a wall flat died against his knuckles like a candle pinched out. He looked at me the way you'd look at a fly that had landed in your dinner. Then the air behind Lost Child tore open, a seam of dark purple, cold pouring off the edges of it, and he stepped backward into the dark, still smiling, promising me almost fondly that he would be back for what was his, and that the town that had told him no would learn what no was worth. Holt followed him in. The seam closed over them. The cleaver was still shaking in my hand. Heather had folded down over one of her own spotless tables, shoulders going like a bellows. When she got words out, they came in pieces. She didn't know what she was supposed to do. She'd ruined it, all of it. I crouched so we were eye to eye. Listen to me. Everybody stumbles. Everybody falls flat at least once. The only question that's ever mattered is how you get back up and start walking with your head high. I waited until she looked at me. You're Heather Pemberton. Smart, quick hands, serious to a fault, proud, a little clumsy when you're nervous. One breath. And my junior. That doesn't stop being true because a rich man tore up a piece of paper. She didn't answer, but the shaking eased. We're closing this place tonight, I told the room. All of us, my diner, in an hour. We've got a war to plan. The townspeople who'd stayed nodded like I'd only asked them to help shift a table. Crouched there in front of her, I remembered the first time I carried her, years back in the capital, when she was new to John's kitchen and I was still the sous chef with the blue bandana knotted over my head. She'd gotten herself into a brawl in an alley. Some men had been leaning on a noblewoman who couldn't fight back, and Heather, all elbows and temper, had waded in for a stranger she'd never see again. She won it. She also couldn't walk after, so I'd put her on my back and carried her home through the dark, her forehead knocking against my shoulder, mumbling the whole way that she hadn't needed the help. She'd always been like that, ready to bleed for somebody who couldn't hold their own, too proud to let anybody hold hers. I hadn't thought about that night in a long time. I thought about it now, with her debt sitting on my shoulders instead of her. The help came the next morning, and it came loud. Katie was through my kitchen door before the bell over the front had finished ringing. Red armor, that grin, announcing to nobody in particular that she wondered whether her Dennis was keeping himself alive out here in the sticks. You old menace. I didn't look up from the board. Don't just wander into a man's kitchen like you own the stove. She'd already found a fork somewhere. I pointed the knife at it without turning around. Put that down. I'll make Hamburg steak later. Sit. Behind her came Rachel, the burned out sage I'd once pulled out from under the Night Vale Company. Upright now, with a lecturer's satchel on her hip and her eyes already cataloging every corner of my dining room. And behind Rachel, in a blue traveling coat with her black hair pulled back tight, came the one person alive who could still make me stand up a little straighter without meaning to. Jean, the head chef of Black's. The woman who'd found a starving orphan and taught him to hold a knife instead of stealing with it. She looked around my shabby little diner, then at me, and said nothing soft. John never did. Only that when you raise a couple of unruly disciples, you end up in all sorts of strange places. Stella set a tray of water down without being asked, gave Katie a flat little two-finger wave, and drifted back to the counter. Then Rachel saw Olivia and forgot the rest of us entirely. Olivia, I said, come here a second. Open up for the lady. Olivia set down her own tray, pleased as ever to be useful, and unlatched the small brass panel at her chest. Rachel made a sound I've never heard a grown woman make. Under the porcelain and the pink apron, Olivia is a whole city of springs. Thousands of them. Gears the size of coins turning against gears the size of teeth. Joints seated in some pale ore that seemed to hold the memory of every motion she'd ever made. Rachel's hands were shaking. There was no doubt, she said. This automaton, my waitress, the one who burns the rice and then apologizes for an hour, was the work of Julius the Clockwork King, the doll from the oldest stories, the one the legends called infinitely close to a human. A divine class piece, she said. The missing one, the one everybody had assumed was a myth. Katie leaned in and tapped the back of Olivia's left hand. A ring sat there, a plain blue band at the base of one finger, set where no part of her belonged. What's this one do? Olivia turned her hand over and looked at it like she was seeing it for the first time. She didn't know, she said, in that bright, even voice. She didn't remember it being put there. She didn't, now that I thought about it. remember much of anything from before the day I bought her. I filed that away and kept it behind my teeth. Turned out John hadn't crossed half the country for me. She'd come to check on Heather and picked up Katie and Rachel on the road like burrs on a coat. Heather had been hiding in the corner since the blue coat first walked in. It didn't save her. Jean crossed the room, took her former disciple by the ear, and hauled her off to a quiet table for the kind of scolding only a teacher can give. I caught the words failed, and after every single time, I warned you before I gave the two of them their privacy. Whatever else passed between them stayed between them. Heather went home after, red-faced, and, I thought, a little lighter for it. Then, the warmth went out of the room. Katie put both hands flat on my counter, and the grin was gone. If Lost Child said he could turn a town to a barren field, she told me, then he could. She'd heard his name in ugly rooms. The man ran the black market in rare beasts, cages full of things bred hungry, and he'd climbed past level 90, high enough to fold space with a single step. The way I'd watched him do it and walk out through a hole in the air. John, who hates a fight the way I hate a cold stove, agreed with every word. A man like that uses all his strength even to swat one fly. This wasn't the arrogant Joseph and his hired arsonists. This was something worse, and it was already on its way. I didn't know a thing about Julius the Clockwork King before that day. Rachel filled the rest in for me, and I'll set it down the way she set it down for me. They say he built the whole study of magic almost single-handed, back in an age when nobody understood how any of it fit together. One of the listed kings, they call him, alongside the first king who founded the skills and the queen who founded the adventurers. A genius. Also, by every account that survived him, an absolute child. The story goes that his doll, his Olivia, the same one now burning my rice a few rooms away, once tidied his workshop while he slept, and threw out a great heap of scribbled notes she'd taken for rubbish. He woke, found them gone, and came apart at the seams. He shouted at her, called her a stupid doll who'd ruined months of his work, told her, in his temper, that maybe he'd cast her out, exile her, see how she liked the open road. She only tilted her head and asked which notes he meant. The notes were his own, something about slamming two water-core elements together, hard enough to make a heat that could level a hill. He never got them back. He never quite forgave the loss either, and not once in the telling did he admit the fault was his for leaving genius in a pile that looked like trash. The story doesn't end on his pride, though. This is the part Rachel told softest. A day or two after the quarrel, Julius turned up at the lodge of his friend Nora, the Wayfarer Queen, the one who'd mapped the deep dungeons with a divine wolf at her side, another of the listed kings. She brewed him a herb tea and let him sulk by her fire, while her great gray wolf, big enough to fill a wall, watched him with one ancient half-open eye. He insisted, loudly, that he'd done nothing wrong, that she was the one who ought to apologize, that he certainly, absolutely, was not here about the doll. Nora only smiled over the rim of her cup. "You want to make up with her," she said. "You're just sitting in my chair because you can't work out how." The wolf lifted its head and told them both, in that silent voice its kind uses, that humans fret themselves sick over nothing, and that it was, at present, trying to nap. Then it put its heavy chin back down on its paws. Julius didn't argue with the wolf. He didn't apologize to Olivia either, not in any story anybody bothered to keep. Whatever he meant to say to her, he seems to have run out of time to say it. And the doll who threw out his notes doesn't remember his face at all. Green shouldered in through the front door mid-afternoon, laughing that laugh of his, and told me I'd want to come see what was happening outside. I went out. The whole street had turned into something I didn't quite have a word for. They'd armed themselves. Not soldiers, my regulars. The carriage driver with a cudgel across his shoulder, the jeweler holding a fireplace poker like a sword, the blacksmith's grandmother, 80 if she was a day, hefting a hammer that had shod 100 horses, a man with his dog at his heel. Somebody had spread the word that we were going to war with a noble, and instead of shuttering their windows and locking their doors, they had come and stood at mine. They wanted to know if it was true. When I told them it was, that a rich man meant to take one of ours and burn the town flat if we said no, not one of them flinched. No noble was taking their waitress, somebody shouted. For our own, shouted somebody else, and the whole street took it up and threw it back. Olivia had followed me out. She stood on the step with her tray still in both hands, Stella quiet beside her, and for once, she didn't have a bright answer ready. She bowed, too low, the way she does everything a little too much, and thanked them, every last one of them, for this unworthy Olivia. I looked at that street full of pokers and hammers and old women, and I thought about the man who kept hungry things in cages and priced people by what they were worth to him. He had it backwards. He always would. You can't buy a street like this one. You earn it, one plate at a time, and then one day it comes and stands in the road for you. I found out later how that same night went in the capital. in a dark room I never set foot in. I'm setting it down the way it reached me. Lost child took a visitor, a silver-haired swordswoman in a white officer's coat, hair cut short, a blade she kept turned away from the room out of a habit that never quite switched off. Her name was Florence, and she hadn't come for herself. She came on behalf of a man called Heath. She gave him the answer plainly. Heath agreed to the plan, and Heath had sent a line along with it, cold as a draft under a door, that if Lost Child meant to do something foolish, he ought at least to do it thoroughly. Even she seemed to balk at the size of what she was carrying. Must a whole town really burn? She asked him, over one collector's whim. Lost Child only warmed to it. He hated being made a fool of, he told her. Hated it enough that being mocked was never where the account ended. The account ended with the mocker wiped clean off the map. A lion, he said, uses all its strength even to run down a rabbit. When he moved for total ruin, nothing halfway, and the preparations he added were already turning. Had been since the first evening he'd walked my little street. Florence gave him a long, cool look, said that what she'd come to say was said, and left with that gliding walk of hers, the sword still hidden along her arm. Then Lost Child stood alone in the candlelight, pleased with himself, and gave the thing its name. Not a raid, not a lesson, an eradication. I didn't know that word had been spoken yet. I didn't know about Heath at all, only that somewhere behind the rich man with the red comb, there was a colder shape than him, a hand that gave permission, and that whatever it was had just looked at what he meant to do to my town and told him yes. All I knew was what I could see from my own doorway. The town sharpening its kitchen knives in the gray afternoon, and something coming for us out of the dark that no number of knives was ever going to be enough to stop. The night everything came for us, I keep circling back to a thing I never saw. A ring, bought in a jeweler's shop a long time ago, in the years before anyone alive could remember. I'm setting it down the way it reached me. There was a boy with hair like blue crystal who leaned over a glass case and could not make up his mind. Julius, they called him later, the Clockwork King, though he was nobody's king yet, just a genius who behaved like a child. Beside him stood Nora, brown-haired and sun-worn, the kind of woman who left her great gray wolf outside the city walls, because you do not walk a thing that size down a street of nobles. You've held up every jeweler in the district, Nora said, and gave him a shove toward the counter. Pick one before they close on us. He picked the blue one, a small stone, the exact color of his own hair. Nora asked him then, quietly, the way you ask a thing you already half know the answer to, what would become of the ones he loved after he was gone? The wolf, the girl waiting at home. He said he was not certain. He said people keep making the same mistakes over and over, and then, slowly, across hundreds of years, they walk a few steps towards something better. She told him he played the innocent, but he was a realist underneath. He did not argue. He carried the ring home to a maid with short golden hair who had spent the whole day apologizing. She had thrown out a stack of his research notes by mistake, swept them into the fire thinking they were scrap, and she kept dropping to the floor to beg his pardon like the world was ending. He did not shout, this once. He took her hand and pushed the blue ring onto her finger. Olivia looked at it like the sun had come down to sit on her hand. Thank you, she said, and then she said it again. And then she was hugging him hard enough to crack a rib and swearing she would serve him forever. He let her. He never told her what the ring was for. Some things a maker keeps to himself until the day comes to say them, and sometimes that day runs out before he does. That is all I know of it. Keep the ring in the back of your mind. It comes back. Back in my own town, the evening went soft in a way I did not trust. 2 days of the whole street sharpening its knives, and now half of them had decided the rich man's threat was so much wind. Jean sat at the counter, trading jokes with Stella about what a handful I had been as a boy. Somebody laughed. The soup was on. It felt like peace, and peace was the one thing I knew we had not earned yet. Katie found me in the kitchen and said the thing nobody else would. People are going to die tonight, she said. Almost certainly. You can pour your whole heart into it, and that is still how these go. Not tonight. I kept my eyes on the cleaver I was honing. Not one. I will cut down everyone I can reach on my own. The ones I miss, you catch. She looked at me the way you look at a child who has promised to hold back the tide. She did not say I was wrong. She just checked her swords. Heather was not there. Jean had marched her home that morning to sleep off her guilt, and Heather had gone, but not before swearing that if the rich man's words came true, she would risk her neck in the thick of it. I filed that away and did not think it would matter. I was wrong about that too. On the south wall, Green kept the watch with Porter, and Green kept laughing at nothing the way he always did, right up until the nothing started making a sound. Huh, Green said. What's that? Porter had the spyglass up. Big man, merchant's eye, steady hands. And I am told his hands were not steady for long. Out past the tree line, the dark was moving. Not wind, not water. A tide of shapes, low and fast and far too many, pouring down toward the town. Ring the bell. Porter got it out low. Then he was on his feet screaming it. Ring the bell. They're here. They are here. The alarm went up over the rooftops, and my soft, untrustworthy evening tore straight down the middle, out past the wall, and I pieced this together only after. The man behind all of it sat and watched his own disaster come true. Lord Ambrose lost child, with Holt at his shoulder like a shut door, and Candy sprawled on the wagon, bored out of her skull by anything that took more than one sentence to explain. He was not there to conquer us. That is the part that turned my stomach when I understood it. He had opened the cages himself. The story he would tell the capital by morning was that his phantom beasts had escaped through rotten bars, a tragedy, and that he, grieving and generous, had ridden in to head the crackdown and save what could be saved. The man who lit the fire, standing in the smoke, taking the medal for it. Holt asked him, flat, about the residents and about the automaton. Lost Child only said in that silk voice that a man must be willing to discard something to gain a greater thing, and that this would be a night history remembered. I will not put the cost of it into the pretty words, he would not either. People were in danger who had done nothing to earn it. I had made exactly one promise, back in my kitchen, and out here in the dark, it was already being called a lie. And at the tree line, where the lantern light did not reach, one more shape stood and watched and did not move, hooded, silent. Not one of the beasts, not one of his men. Just a figure marked the way I had once been marked, cast out, kept to the shadows, watching a town it had no place in. I did not know it was there. I would not learn what it wanted for a long time yet. Hold that one too. Then they hit the gate, and there was no more time to wonder who had sent them. The walls of our town were built to turn back bandits and stray dogs, waist high in places. A polite suggestion of a wall. The phantom beasts came over it like water over a step, starved things, driven mad on purpose, every one of them, until all that was left inside was hunger and a hatred of anything that stood upright. I met the first one at the gate, a great deer-shaped beast, antlers like a falling stack of knives, and it came in fast enough to take a house down. I planted my feet and I used the thing I had spent a lifetime pretending I did not have. Forced eviction strike, level 100. The cleaver came around and the force of it did not just cut, it threw. A wall of pressure that lifted the deer beast mid-charge and hurled it back into the three behind it, and the four of them went down in a tangle at the foot of the wall. I was already moving to the next. Cut, throw, turn. Cut, throw, turn. I put myself in the gap where the wall was lowest and I made myself the wall. For a few minutes, it even worked. I said the number over and over in my head. None, none, not one. And I swung until my arms sang. Then the air beside me went wrong. It gathered out of nothing, a low purple mist that pulled itself half into the shape of a man and then scattered into a flock of bats and then drew back together again. Lost Child, or enough of him to talk. He had left his warm wagon to come stand in the worst of it, and that told me, before he said a word, that he wanted something here more than he wanted to be safe. He taunted me the way a man taunts a dog on a chain, asking whether his shape unsettled me and promising that his magic would unsettle me more. I swung the cleaver clean through him and hit fog. He reassembled a pace to the left, delighted with himself. The only real question of the night, he told me, was how long he could keep a nuisance like me planted right here, doing nothing that mattered, while the town came apart behind my back. That was the whole trick. He did not need to beat me. He only needed to hold me. Behind me, the street belonged to Katie. She took one look at the numbers coming up the central street and made the cold call a good commander makes, and a proud one never will. She screamed at the rear guard to hold formation and fall back at full speed. Get the wounded and the slow behind the line. Give up the ground. By the minutes. Then she stayed. One woman, red armor, 2 swords, at the mouth of the street under the clock tower, with a flood coming straight at her. She stacked her skills one over another, fast. The way you layer a sauce that will break if you rush it and break worse if you dawdle. The one that let her body slip a blow on its own. The one that made sure she struck first. The pair that split every cut into 2 and turned the second one into a kill. Then the beast reached her, and she became the reason the street held. I could hear her over all of it, swearing, laughing, telling the horde that this was, honestly, the worst night of her whole life. She gave ground one step at a time, and she made every step cost. Over in the East District, 2 of mine had gone looking for the ones nobody had counted. Olivia and Stella had slipped out of the shelter while the coordinator's back was turned. Stella led because she knew every lane and gutter of this town from her daily walks, and Olivia went beside her with the cannons already swung out over her shoulders. They worked house to house, calling for stragglers, for anyone too old old or too stubborn or too frightened to run, and they started walking them back toward the guild 2 and 3 at a time. "No one like that lives in Stella's town," Stella said once, short and sure of it, and I think that was her whole philosophy of the night. Get them home, sort the rest out after. They had nearly cleared the district when the tall man stepped out of the dark ahead of them. Holt, black suit buttoned to the throat, arms crossed, calm as a shut door. He told Olivia, in that even voice of his, that he felt a strange kinship with her, that he sensed in her a loyalty that would give up its own life for its master, the very twin of his own, and that in a rotted world it was a rare thing to meet one of your own kind. And then he told her, just as evenly, that his lord had commanded it, and so he would destroy her here, or break her down into a state small enough to carry home. Olivia put Stella behind her. "There is much this Olivia does not understand," she said. "I am not clever. I am full of things I cannot grasp. And yet, with all my heart and all my trust, I will blow you away." The cannons on her shoulders roared. He crossed his arms and the blast broke on them like surf on a rock. And then he was inside her reach, faster than a man that size had any right to be, and his strikes landed, heavy and precise, one after the next. She fired, and he was not where the shot went. She swung and he ducked under it. He was counting her shots, I learned later, the way a card sharp counts a deck, and he told her plainly that she had spent most of them already, and that once she was down, he would see to the House Ashcroft girl as well. "Olivia!" Stella cried out. "Do not think you can break me, you wicked man!" Olivia's jaw had taken a hit, and her voice came out wrong, but it did not shake. "I will protect Lady Stella, even if this body is smashed to pieces, even if I am worn down to a single spring. I will surely blow you away." She was losing. She kept getting back up. Up on the roof of the old Night Vale building, my 2 young mages and Rachel had chased down the one enemy nobody had assigned them, Candy. Brown coat, brown cap, that bored little smile. My twin-tailed mage spotted her first and named her out loud, Olivia's enemy, and, with real venom, her own love rival. And the 3 of them went up the wall after her, certain that 3 against 1 could not lose. Candy let them think it. She danced along the roofline, slipping arrows and grasping spells. And then she simply was not there anymore. A stealth skill that slid her clean out of their senses. Rachel caught it a half-breath too late, shouting that it was an evasion technique, that Candy was close, that they should watch out. Candy struck her from nowhere and knocked her staggering toward the roof's edge. The mages screamed. Then the brown coat was gone again, laughing somewhere in the dark, and my 3 were left swinging at empty air. Me, I was still chasing fog. I ran the rich man down the length of the wall, and every time I closed the gap, he came apart into mist and reformed a stride ahead, unhurried, letting me spend myself. He wanted me tired. He wanted me to feel every second the town was screaming behind me and know that I was up here accomplishing nothing. "Damn it, hold still," I said, to no one, to a cloud. And then he stopped running, and he made me his offer, and that was so much worse than the chase. He took out a collar, an old thing, ugly. A band of dark metal with a dull gray gem set into the throat of it, and a weight to it you could feel from a distance. One of the outlawed ones, made in a crueler age to bind whoever wore it to obey. "Put it on," he said, and he would call every last beast off with a single word. The whole horde stilled in an instant. My people would live, all of them, right now. He said it gently, the way you would offer bread to a starving man, and the only price was me, my neck, my will, the rest of my life spent as a thing that belonged to him. I want to tell you I laughed in his face. I did not. I stood on that wall with the town burning behind me, and I felt the oldest thing in me turn over and answer him. Here is what I never say out loud. I have spent my whole life certain that I was worth exactly what I could put on the table for other people, and not 1 coin more. That is what I was to the party that used me up and threw me out. That is the shape of the boy who got left in the rain. Somewhere under everything, I have always believed that the right and proper end of a man like me is to be spent all the way down for somebody else's good, and that if I ever got the chance to buy back the people I loved with the whole of myself, refusing would be the selfish thing. He had found that. Somehow, he had reached all the way down and found the exact wound and pressed his thumb into it. And the terrible part was the arithmetic. I stood there and I actually did the sum. 1 collar against a whole town. 1 life I had never valued much anyway, traded for every life behind me that I valued more than my own. Put like that, it was not even a hard trade. It was the easiest thing in the world. A man who would not make it, some voice down in me said, was not a good man refusing to be a slave. He was a coward keeping his own freedom while other people burned for it. Every scream from the streets was another weight on that side of the scale, and the scale was not close. Save them. Just stop being your own. It sounded, God help me, like love. My hand opened. The cleaver went strange and heavy in it. I felt my fingers start to give, felt the knife tip drop toward the stone, felt the word yes come climbing up my throat like something I had swallowed years ago. And out of the dark behind him, something small and fast drove a knife into the rich man's back, into the mist, and the mist bled. He came apart with a sound I had never heard him make, reformed, clutching himself, honestly shocked, spitting that I had dared to wound him, because nothing was supposed to be able to touch him in that shape, and something just had. A good knife, in the right place, at the right half second. Heather, flower still on her sleeves, hair coming loose. My junior, the rival who had spent weeks trying to earn back her own name. She had never gone home to sleep at all. She rounded on me, and she did not spare me 1 ounce of gentleness. What do you think you're doing, Vice Chef? She put herself between me and the collar, like it was a hot stove I had reached a hand toward. You're all muscle and no sense. You don't even know if a word of it is true. He's a con man. He'll say anything. And what safety catch in the whole world could steal that many beasts at once? Does a thing like that even exist? I looked at the collar. I looked at her. Something that had been dropping in me, caught and held. So stop dancing to his tune, she said, lower now and fierce with it. We take him down, fast, and then we go throw everything we have got in front of that shelter. That is all there is to it. She wiped the knife on her apron and gave me a crooked, terrifying grin. So then, Vice Chef, shall we bring back the old Black's Restaurant 1-2? And just like that, the number came back into my head. None, not one. And it did not sound like a lie anymore. It sounded like a job. I closed my hand around the cleaver the right way. The collar still hung there in the mist between us, and I found I could look at it now and feel nothing but the cold, clean pleasure of a man about to knock it out of a bad man's grip. I was not a tool bargaining itself away. I was one cook in a town full of people who had already picked up their knives for one another, and one of them had just put herself between me and the worst thing in the dark. Yeah, I said, let's cook. We moved on him together, and for the first time all night, the rich man in the mist gave ground and stepped back. The night was not won. Katie was still giving up the street 1 step at a time under the clock tower. Olivia was still dragging herself off the ground in the east. Somewhere past the wall, the dark still held more than we had seen, more than any number of knives was ever going to be enough for. But we were moving forward now, the two of us, shoulder to shoulder, and whatever came out of that dark next was going to have to come through both of us to reach my town. The mist would not hold still long enough to hit, and I was done chasing it. I had been swinging at fog for what felt like half the night. The rich man in the purple vapor slid out from under every stroke and reformed a body's length away, wearing that same tired, silky patience, telling me all he had to do was wait while my town came apart behind me. Beside me, Heather had stopped listening to him a while ago. She was doing what she always did when a problem would not behave. She was reducing it. His magic came apart into particles she had worked out, and mist could be fouled. So she cooked. A fistful of salt flung across the space where he tried to gather, a cloud of cracked pepper chasing it. Then, that cheap little boil skill of hers threw up a wall of steam as thick as a kitchen at the dinner rush, and the vapor tried to knit itself back into a man and could not find all its pieces. He hung there half-made, one arm still smoke, the sneer stuck on a face that had not finished forming. That was the opening. I did not waste it. Forced eviction strike is a level 100 skill, and it does exactly one thing. It takes whatever I hit and throws it away, all of it, instantly, as far as the world will allow. I planted my boots on the stone, brought the flat of the cleaver around in one clean line, and put every pound I had behind it. Go on, I told him. Fly. You are banned from the whole world. He came off that wall like a cork out of a bottle, a thin ribbon of purple screaming up into the dark, and I heard the panic riding in it, the great collector shrieking to know how far this thing meant to carry him. I did not have the number. That was rather the point. Then I turned around, and the town was still burning behind me. I did not see this part myself. I pieced it together after, from Jean, and I am setting it down the way it reached me. At the north end, the rear guard was one breath from breaking. The phantom beasts had come at the shelter in a starved wave, all glowing eyes and open jaws, and Jean stood in front of the last door with her carving knife and no line left behind her. She is the woman who raised me, and the thing about Jean is she does not lie, not even to herself. She looked at what was coming and said, calm as salting a pot, that this was as far as it went. It was not. The howl came first, one long note out of the black forest that stopped the beasts mid-stride, because every hungry thing in that horde knew exactly what it meant. Then the tree line moved. Dozens of them poured out of the dark, gray divine wolves the size of horses, and at the head of them ran an old one with one flank torn bare to the muscle and a hide written over with a lifetime of scars. That scarred wolf hit the horde like a landslide hits a fence. The beasts that had been about to break my mother's door turned to run and found there was nowhere left to run to. The pack folded over them, and I learned later there had been a small silent thing passed between the scarred leader and a younger gray wolf at his shoulder. One word each, the kind of thing wolves say without sound. The old one saying, "Just this once, my son," and the young one answering, "I am sorry." A father who had cast his son out, coming this one time because the son had asked. The exile had gone looking for a pack that would not throw him away, and in the end, he had brought his father's whole pack home to us. Across the town, in a narrow lane where she had been leading stragglers to safety, Stella went very still. She is not a girl who makes much noise, and she had spent the whole night saying almost nothing, just moving people through the dark by memory. But when that howl rolled over the rooftops, she stopped where she stood, and her hand came up to her mouth, and the only word she said was a name. She said, "Biscuit," her wolf, the half-starved thing she had once fed scraps under the diner table and called a dog because she loved him too much to call him anything grander. The exile she had let go so he could be something bigger than a pet. He had come back, and he had not come back alone. And Stella stood in that ruined lane and laughed and cried at the same time like the tide had turned. It had, but she could not go to him yet. A little further down that lane in the dark, one more fight was still going, the one that was going to break my heart. The two young mages had run out of roof to run on. I got this from them after, all three talking over each other, so give me some grace on the details. Twintail and Ponytail had carried the injured Rachel across half the town's rooftops with the stalker on their heels. That grinning woman in the checkered coat who would not stop coming. They went through a window into the clock tower and climbed until there was no more up to climb, and found Green and his companion wedged into a corner, insisting loudly that hiding up a tower was strategy, not fear. Then Candy came up through the hatch, sing-song and pleased with herself, telling them it was rude to start a fight and then run, that they should all just lie down and be good. And Porter stepped out from behind the big clock and said he could fight, actually. Nobody there took him for a fighter. That was the trick of it. He is a fat old merchant, and once a contender in the Royal Fist tournament, and the one skill he never lost was reading which way a body wants to fall. So when Candy lunged in with her nasty little shock skill, he did not dodge. He let her take hold of him, wrapped her up, tipped both of them clean out over the tower's low rail, and told her on the way down that wanting what you cannot have is a bad habit. They came down onto a lower roof, and Porter came down on top. Green and his companion had grabbed him by the belt at the last second and taken just enough off the fall to keep him whole. Candy took the rest. When the dust settled, she was beaten. Down, done. Not going anywhere on her own for a good long while, and I will spare you the particulars, because there is nothing there worth lingering on. She lay in the rubble spitting that she would kill them all one day, and Porter dusted himself off and asked whether she had seen that one coming. She had not. Very few people ever saw Porter coming. That was the whole point of him. I came over the central square at a dead run and nearly went straight past Katie before I saw her. She was on her knees in the middle of it, both swords still in her hands and neither lifted, a ring of scattered beasts around her that she had held off alone until the wolves took the weight off. The captain of the Silver Wing Battalion, spent right down to the wick. I dropped beside her, grabbed her shoulder, said her name, told her she looked terrible and thank God she was breathing. She lifted her head about an inch. Her mouth moved. I did not catch it then, and it was only later she admitted what she had muttered, which was that I was late. She was right. I got her propped against a wall, put a runner on her, and made her promise not to die while I was gone. Then I was moving again, because Stella's voice had just carried across the rooftops from the east, and there was nothing playful left in it. I want to tell this part slowly, because Olivia deserves that much. By the time I reached the rooftops above the crossroads, it was nearly over, and she was losing. Holt fought like a machine himself, all feints and counters, no wasted motion, and Olivia had nothing left. Her cannons were dry, her spring power almost gone. She stood in the middle of that crossroads with her fists up like an old boxer who has forgotten how to fall down, and she told him to come, wicked man, and he came. She is an automaton, so I will tell you plainly what happened to her the way it happened, without dressing it up. His blows cracked the porcelain along her jaw. They split the plating on her face. They shook the little memory ores loose in her neck, the ones that hold everything she has ever seen, and I watched her forget things in real time, watched pieces of her go quiet under his hands. And still she would not go down, because down meant Stella, and Stella was 10 steps behind her. Then he drew back and drove one last strike straight into the center of her chest, into the core gem that is the whole of her life, and it broke. Here is the thing nobody knew, not even Olivia. That gem was not just her heart, it was a seal, and when it shattered, everything it had been holding shut for a very long time came flooding back out. And this is what she remembered, and I am telling it the way she later told it to me. An old man in a bed, white hair with the faintest thread of blue still running through it, the way hers runs gold. Julius, the clockwork king, the genius who had built her, at the very end of his long life, with his first and finest creation, kneeling at his bedside begging to stay. He would not let her. He gathered what he had left, and he told her, gently, that he was releasing her from her duty. Olivia, he said, I release you. I exile you from this house, and from me. She did not understand. She had been made to serve him, and she wanted nothing but to serve him to the end, and go quiet when he did. And he was taking even that away. He pressed her hands between his, and told her she was free now, that he thanked her for everything, always. Thank you. And when she wept and said there was nothing left for her without him, he smiled and told her the truest thing anyone ever gave her. You still have things left to do, he said. He sealed the memory of himself away inside her core, so the losing of him would not break her, and he sent his doll out into the world in exile, with no master and no past, to go and find, somewhere out there, a reason of her own to keep walking. And she had vowed in that room that whatever it cost, however long it took, she would find him again someday. For one suspended breath, she was not on that ruined street at all. She was small again and kneeling on a warm floor, holding the hands of the only person who had ever made her, understanding at last, a whole lifetime too late, that the cruelest thing he ever did to her had been the kindest, that she had not been thrown away. She had been set free. She had been loved enough to be let go. And a doll who was built without the words for it finally had them. She came back to herself with the enemy's arm still buried in her shattered chest. I was close enough now to hear her voice, and it had changed. It was not the flat, literal little voice she used to take our orders. It was full of something. She closed both broken hands around Holt's trapped arm, and she told him she had him now, wicked man, that she remembered everything, that in this last moment, she remembered that person. Holt started shouting at her to let go. I will not pretty up his part, he panicked. He begged the machine to release him, and she did not. She spent the very last of her spring power in one long squeeze, and folded him down into the street until he stopped moving. Not dead, just out, just done. The way Porter did Candy, the way this town does its enemies when it can help it. Then she let him drop, and her legs went, and she started to fall. I got there in time to catch that, at least. I came off the roof and got under her before she hit the stones, and I held her up, and Stella crashed down beside us with both hands over her mouth. I told Olivia she did it. I told her she was incredible, that she was the toughest thing in this whole town, that we would get her patched up. Just hang on. She looked up at me with half her face gone and asked very softly how she had done, whether she had protected Lady Stella well. I said she did great. I carried her toward the shelter with the sky going gray at the edges, and she told me, almost too quiet to hear, that it had not been a mistake after all, that she was glad she had kept walking. And somewhere under my hands, her systems began, very gently, to wind down. The man who did all of this did not die on my wall. I almost wish he had, because what happened to him instead was worse, and he earned every bit of it. He dragged himself back to the Capitol in tatters. I heard this later from a judge who heard it from the Knights, so take it as secondhand, but the shape is true. The great collector, the man who raised a whole town to own one doll, crawled into a fine cafe 2 days later, looking like something the tide left, and sat down across from the one ally he had left, a sleek, black-haired man named Heath, drinking tea and reading the morning paper, who did not so much as look up. Lost Child told him the plan had failed, but that it was no matter, that he already had his next move, that he only needed Heath to let him back into the fold. And Heath, still turning his newspaper, told him there would be no next move. He was finished. It was already done, because a writer, a woman named Enid Morrow, of all the small people in the world, had published a book, and that book laid the crimes of House Lost Child out in plain daylight for everyone to read, and the warrants were already out across 3 borders with his name on everyone. That was the part that undid me when I heard it. A year back, my mage had talked a broken plagiarist into writing something true instead of something stolen. That was all. One kindness, freely given to a nobody. And it had grown up quietly in the dark and become the exact blade that gutted the collector. Heath folded his paper, told the ruined old man to offer his neck in silence when they came, that it was fitting for men like them, and went back to his tea. The Knights came, of course. He tried to run. He tried to pour himself into the purple mist one last time and slip through their fingers the way he had slipped through mine all night. He could not. He was too spent. The mist came half up and sagged back into a wheezing old man in a fouled coat, stumbling down an alley, with wind mages closing off both ends. And there, the story handed him the last insult it had saved for him. There was a rookie in that alley, a knight so new, she still could not carry her own oversized sword straight. Long blonde hair, dented armor, halfway through a sandwich. Henrietta, the same girl a masked man had once pulled out of a dungeon before she knew his face. She squinted at the wreck of a man staggering toward her and asked, with her mouth still full, whether he happened to be that wanted fellow, Mr. Lostchild. He lunged at her out of pure animal panic. She yelped and swung on reflex, and a sword dance skill she had barely learned went off all at once, and it put the great international criminal flat on the ground. Then she panicked in the other direction entirely, dropped down beside him, wailing that she had overdone it. Was he all right? Please do not sue. It was probably mistaken identity. She would do anything. It was not mistaken identity. The senior knights came pounding up the alley and found the most wanted man in 3 kingdoms already down, and their rookie kneeling over him, apologizing to him. The collector who had bought and sold people his whole life, who would have discarded a girl like her without a thought, was arrested by a hungry rookie more by accident than by aim. I cannot think of a thing he deserved more. And then, the way it always does if you outlast the bad night, the ordinary morning came back. We put the town back together one board at a time, and when it stood straight again, we had a send-off to hold. Heather was leaving us, the rival cook who had come at us with everything she had, and lost, and stayed, and turned out to be family after all. John had offered to retrain her properly at Black's restaurant, and she was going. She stood in the middle of my diner, told everyone she had caused them all so much trouble, and bowed so low her forehead nearly hit a table. One of my old regulars took her hands, thanked her for feeding him through the worst of it, and told her to come back a real chef. She promised she would twice, like she needed to hear herself say it, then picked up her one bag and went, and half the room walked her to the door. Her debt was closed. The whole ugly business had started with a rival trying to ruin me and ended with her waved out my door by the town she once tried to beat, off to be better. That is the only kind of ending I ever wanted for anybody. Then the bell over the door went, and it was Olivia. She came in a wheelchair, Stella pushing it, and I have never been so glad to see anybody roll through a doorway in my life. They had put her core gem back together. She was quieter than before, and slower, and she would be a while mending. But her pale gold eyes found me, and she said I was looking better, which is her idea of a joke, and I told her she was the one looking better, and Vivian nearly knocked over a chair, welcoming her home. Sebastian Cade, the judge, came in behind them with an armload of books. Some of our rare volumes had survived the fire, half burned, and the restorers had brought back what they could. He set them down, took a little too much credit for the collector's arrest, and mentioned that Lostchild was well and truly caught. And among the saved books, there was one Olivia would not let anyone else carry, the Clockwork manuscript. Everything her maker ever wrote, everything Julius ever knew, singed at the edges and pieced back whole. She took it into her lap, this doll who had crossed the whole world as an exile with no memory of the man who made her. And she held it the way you hold a person and said very softly that she had finally met it. At last. Somewhere in her, I think, she had met him too. Vivian mentioned that our mysterious Sir Biscuit had wandered off again, gone back to the forest without a word. Stella just smiled at that. He would come back. His kind always came back to this table in the end. That was rather what the table was for. There is one thread I cannot tie off for you, and I am leaving it hanging on purpose, because so did the world. That same well-dressed man walked out of his cafe, down a bright street, and stopped in front of a boy sitting against a wall, thin, one leg gone below the knee, selling little paintings he had made himself. The boy told his story flat, the way you tell a thing you have stopped being ashamed of. He used to steal, stole from the wrong man once, and it cost him the leg, and scraped by now on leftovers and a sick sister. And Heath, who had just watched one collector of people fall, crouched down, looked the boy over, the way you look over something you mean to buy, and quietly invited him into his world. He did not say what his world was. He did not say who he really was, or what he wanted, or why a cold man in a fine coat goes around gathering up the discarded and the ruined and the sharp-eyed. I could tell you he has my face, near enough, like a colder brother I never had, that the sight of him gathering an outcast the way I once gathered mine made the hair stand up on my arms. But I would only be guessing. I did not know then, and I do not know now. So let me leave you where all of it really started, a lifetime before any of this. A young man in a cluttered workshop half out of his mind from never sleeping, heavy bags under bright eyes, crowing to an empty room that he had done it at last. The world's first fully autonomous automaton, and only a genius like him could have made such a thing. He leaned over the little maid he had built and told her to wake up, his finest creation, his first servant, Olivia. She opened her eyes for the very first time, looked up at him, this bright, chattering, clumsy new thing, and asked what her master would like her to do. She decided, all on her own, that what he needed was food. Fried rice. She insisted on it, and she made it badly, and he ate every grain of it anyway. And the two of them sat in that messy little room over a plate of scorched rice, the lonely genius and the doll he had just woken. And she begged him to keep her forever and ever, and he laughed and said he would. He did not keep her forever. Nobody keeps anybody forever, but he set her free with a reason to walk, and she walked it all the way across the world to a corner diner full of other exiles, and found a table where nobody gets thrown away. That is the town we built. That is who came home to it, and the shadow at the edge of it, with my face and his outcasts, well, come back, and I will tell you.